Good morning. We're going to start now. Excuse me. This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 180162, 180163, 180164, 180165, 180166, 180167, 180168, 180178, and resolutions number 180185. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the resolution and bills.
Bill number 180162, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2019 through 2024 inclusive. Bill number 180163, an ordinance to adopt the fiscal 2019 capital budget. Bill number 180164, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2019. Bill number 180165, an ordinance amending Chapter 19-1800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled School Tax Authorization to authorize the Board of Education to oppose a real estate tax for the School District of Philadelphia under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 180166, an ordinance amending Section 19-1301.1 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Homestead Exclusion to increase the amount of the homestead exclusion under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 180167, an ordinance amending Chapter 19-1400 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Realty Transfer Tax to increase the rate of realty transfer tax under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 180168, an ordinance amending Chapter 19-1500 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Wage and Net Profits Tax by revising certain tax rates under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 180178, an ordinance amending Chapter 19-1500 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Wage and Net Profits Tax by revising certain tax rates under certain terms and conditions. Resolution number 180185, a resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2019 through 2023 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2018, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this Council, approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2019, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2019 through fiscal 2024. Today we'll hear testimony from the following departments: Revenue, Board of Revision of Taxes, and we will hear revenue tax bills, and we will have a break at the end of that testimony, and then we will have a wonderful, wonderful public testimony when our citizens get to come in and weigh in on these very important measures. Thank you very much. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify is?
Commissioner Breslin.
Thank you. Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. I am Frank Breslin, Revenue Commissioner. I would like to thank the members of City Council for their ongoing support as the department collects the money needed to provide city and school district services and the efforts to launch and expand assistance programs and payment plans for taxpayers and water customers. To continue those efforts, the Department of Revenue is requesting $30,707,541 from the general fund in fiscal year 2019. This is a $662,995 increase over fiscal year 2018. This includes $223,595 in Class 100 to provide for salary increases for District Council 33 staff and to add one new position, a law data analyst, which will facilitate delinquent property acquisitions by the land bank. The remainder of the increase will fund outside appraiser services. My tongue's getting tied up in a pretzel here. The remainder of the increase will fund outside appraiser services for expert reports and testimony when property owners contest appraisals for real estate tax purposes. Joining me today are Michelle Bethel, Deputy Revenue Commissioner, and Marissa Waxman, First Deputy Revenue Commissioner. We are pleased to answer your questions on Revenue's Fiscal Year 2019 operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you. You got the memo. Thank you. Short testimony puts council members in a very, very great mood. Thank you. Thank you so much. Commissioner, I want to get into this issue about Airbnb. I recently attended a conference, and they were talking about how things were changing, just generally, technology, all the world has changed, the bottom line. And they put a list up about Airbnb and how it was making a significant imprint on the market in terms of short-term rentals. And they actually had them, it was Marriott, Hilton, and Airbnb was third, and a close third, I mean, virtually the same as Hilton. So, you know, obviously as legislators, you always want to make sure that people have new industries and they pay their fair share because they're making money, and you know how we do in government, we want a little piece of the money because we have to provide services to the Airbnbs, wherever they may be. Can you kind of talk to me about, you know, what taxes the Airbnb is required to pay? I mean, they're seem like very miniature hotels to a degree. So do they pay the hotel tax? Do they pay the BIRD? Do they pay any other taxes? Just talk to me about this whole Airbnb phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, primarily, this goes back to the year of the papal visit. We did a lot of outreach around Airbnb and making it known that short-term rentals were subject to the hotel tax. And we did online filing, and since that time, our hotel tax revenues have risen. They would also be subject, I believe, to the BIRT tax. And then Marissa, you were doing some work on that. You want to?
Sure. So hi, I'm Marissa Waxman, First Deputy Revenue Commissioner. So when we updated, or when Council passed legislation to clarify in the hotel tax legislation that booking agents, the folks that facilitate those short-term rentals, they are allowed to collect and remit the hotel tax on behalf of the operators, whether it's, you know, somebody renting out a spare bedroom or somebody who's got a property that they're renting out. And at the same time, we worked with License and Inspections, Council, Planning, to make sure that there were certain limits around where and how this activity could happen. So generally, you know, if it's in your home, you can do it a certain number of nights a year. And actually in Philadelphia, the zoning doesn't allow folks to say, buy a building and do short-term residential rentals, you know, on a repeating basis if it's in a residential neighborhood. So there are some limits on who's doing this.
Are they all done through the booking agent?
So not all short-term rentals are done through booking agents.
So what about the ones that don't go through a booking agent? How do we track that?
So the ones that don't do that, they are required to collect and remit the tax directly. And so some booking agents take care of that, some others don't. Some folks, you know, just put an ad up in the window or Craigslist or whatever, and those folks are required. In addition to that, the folks who are operating these businesses would be subject to the BIRT and PT if they're not corporations, and for the most part, they're not corporations, as well as any, you know, property taxes and things like that.
How many do we have in the city?
We can get back to you with a number of registered hotel taxpayers.
You said you'll say that?
We can get back to you with the number of registered hotel taxpayers, but it'll be different than the number of units for tax purposes. For example, if a booking agent is the one collecting and remitting, they file one return, make one large payment, as opposed to individual payments for each individual unit.
So do we know, or we don't know?
I wouldn't know the number of individual units. We'll know the number of taxpayers.
All right, so how can we get an accurate number? Because, you know,
So I'm happy to, I can look, and also talking to L&I and planning, we can work together to try and get an answer to that and get some more information around it.
All right, so they Airbnb, and I'm only asking because of the presentation I saw. And they were, so if a person wants to get involved in Airbnb, they have to get a license from L&I?
So it depends how much they're going to do this. If you're doing it very infrequently, and it's in your primary residence, we wanted to make it as easy as possible to comply, because we figured folks were doing this anyway, and we wanted to make sure we were getting the tax revenue. So you do it a couple of nights just when the DNC is in town, just when the Pope is in town, you don't need to get a license. But there's a continuum of, if you're doing it more than X number of nights, or if it's not your primary residence, then there are some licensing requirements. So I can go back and try and get more information about that.
Okay, so you're going to get back to us in terms of the registered Airbnb, which if they're not registered, there's no way for us to track it, or is there a way for us to track it that we just haven't?
On the tax side, I don't know the number of units, but I'll certainly talk to my colleagues in L&I and planning to see if there's information on the license side that might provide more unit-based information.
All right, okay. Okay, Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to each of you. 63% and upward 70 in certain areas. So I have the great honor and pleasure of representing residents in the city of Philadelphia who live in these neighborhoods. They are in Mount Airy, Cedar Brook, depending on what you call it, whether or not there's a shooting or not, West Oak Lane, East Oak Lane, Alany, Logan, Longcrest, Lawndale, Oxford Circle, and Burholme. We have a high rate of home ownership in that district. The city's home ownership rate is 52%. The 9th Councilmatic District's home ownership rate is 63%. And depending on which region in the 9th Councilmatic District you go, some neighborhoods have upwards to a 74 to 80% home ownership rate. Now, I want to, because this is very important to me, just to make sure this is on the record, because this is from your data. The 9th Councilmatic District has the 3rd fewest number of delinquent property tax accounts in all districts in the city of Philadelphia. Okay? Not rich, right? But the 3rd fewest delinquent accounts. In addition to that, we are number 1. Did you hear me? Number 1 when it comes to homeowners who enter into payment agreements with the city of Philadelphia, when we know, because we're not rich, that we can't afford to make the total payment by the deadline. We are the number 1 constituency, my people, who say, city, I want to enter into a payment plan. It's with that in mind that I want you to know I was through the roof when my office received a copy of a letter that was sent by one of our constituents who apparently was in some kind of pilot about the collection of delinquent property taxes and or foreclosures. And when we received it, I'll be very honest, I said, well, wait, I work very closely with Revenue. I met with you, Commissioner. I met with your team, my team. We're on the phone. We call. We're not shock jocks. We don't wait to have an issue and send it to the press to get a headline. That's not how we function. We have a challenge. We call you. How in the world could anybody develop a pilot program for the collection of delinquent property taxes in any neighborhood in the 9th Councilmatic District that is number 1 in making payment arrangements with the city of Philadelphia and has the 3rd fewest delinquent accounts in the city of Philadelphia, and then don't even have the courtesy to come to the council person? Because when anything goes down in that district from a city perspective, that's my tale. They expect me to know. And I had to say to my constituent, 2 of them, I don't know what you're talking about. Tell me how. Tell me when. Tell me why didn't I know. Tell me who received these letters. And tell me, was the 9th Councilmatic District the only district in the city? I think those are fair questions. And I'm going to be quiet and listen.
Well, let me first apologize for that and say that that was clearly an oversight on our part, and that should not have happened, and we apologize for that. We also acknowledge all the work that we have done, and we're very, very grateful for the cooperation and the partnership that we've had with your office. And also let me say that the numbers that you have quoted are correct, that you do have the third lowest in the number of delinquent accounts and also the highest number of delinquent accounts in payment agreements, and we applaud that, and that's certainly a reflection of the efforts from your office. The specific questions I'm going to allow Marissa to answer. She's more familiar with the program, but I wanted to go on the record and make sure that you know, it's a lesson learned for my behalf, and, you know, we'll take the hit there, and I certainly apologize for that.
Thank you. I echo the Commissioner's apologies. We absolutely should have engaged you much, much earlier in this process. And as you may know, the tax man is not normally who folks love to hear from. And so over the past year, we've been exploring a lot of different ways to try and get that message out and find as many different partners and organizations and community groups who can help us share the information about the really valuable assistance programs and the owner-occupied payment agreement program that so many folks in your district have already found really valuable. And so one of the things we've been looking at is how can other people get that message out? And so the information about who is delinquent and whether or not they've got a homestead exemption is public information. So there's no legal barrier to sharing that information. And so what we wound up doing is providing that information to a state representative so that they could reach out and try and help folks get into that program, that maybe folks would be more comfortable talking to someone who wasn't the Department of Revenue about how to take advantage of this program. And so we absolutely agree that, you know, we should involve the council members at every step in this, that you guys are really the champions who get this done. We've done wonderful events in your district. I think we actually have done the most community outreach events in the past year. Of the 174 we did, I think the highest number might have been in the 9th district. And so we really value these community partnerships, the folks who know these neighborhoods better than us and are better connected. And so we really apologize that in this instance we didn't go about it the right way. And it was about 161 taxpayers or homeowners who had fallen behind that we provided information about so that the state representative could reach out to them.
Commissioner, I respect you, and I appreciate your just acknowledging that moving forward, we're going to do this another way. But I want to say this to you on a record, and I want to be clear. We're talking about 161 residents who have fallen behind in preservation of their own home and paying their property taxes. Before we have any coordinated efforts with any nonprofits, any elected officials, or any other willing do-gooders who all of a sudden become vested in making sure that Philadelphians are paying their fair share, they need to be in contact with the district council person. And was the 9th district the only district that this occurred in? Because I want to know, why was my district targeted? If I have the #1 constituency that's in payment agreements and the 3rd fewest delinquent accounts in the city, why was my district targeted?
We also worked with State Senator Vincent Hughes, who was doing similar work to reach out to folks and try and engage them, who we'd also been engaged with through the Earned Income Tax Credit Program.
I appreciate you acknowledging that, and let me just say this. I had the great honor and privilege of serving for 10 years in the Pennsylvania House. 5 of those years, you know, the interesting opportunity to serve as chair of the delegation, work with my colleague, Councilman Alan Dom, in that capacity on a bill that gave the city of Philadelphia additional powers for the collection of delinquent property taxes. So I was vested in Revenue's work long before I arrived. And we, you know, the bill was not only just for Philadelphia, but for the first time when people saw this power that was much needed about to be bestowed on the city of Philadelphia, can you believe that the rest of the state said, wait, this should be statewide? You know, every other county should have the ability to do this. Please don't ever, for my people, I don't think a district council person would feel different, but I mean, for the 9th councilmatic district, I can only speak for me. Don't do that to my people. If you partner with a nonprofit, you tell me Because I have a slew of community-based activities, and I work with state reps, I work with state senators, I work with federal officials, I work with nonprofits. We work together, but it is not together when I don't know, and I'm lambasted with this. Mr. Chairman, I did ask the president just to give me a little leeway before we started because I do have to leave. The next line of questioning that I have is I want to stay on the issue of the collection of delinquent property taxes. And I want to ask you, in terms of those properties, one, those firms that are hired to collect for us, do we collect data on their collection rates and how effective they are so we can know whether or not we're getting a return on our investment? And is that included, and I just didn't look at it, in the data that you shared with us today?
We do collect that information. We're always analyzing our collection agencies to see their performance. It is not included in that information that you have, but we can certainly share collection information with you.
So what I would like to have sent to the president for distribution to all members is, I want to see the performance of those firms that are hired by the city of Philadelphia to collect both residential and commercial tax liens, right? Residential and commercial. In addition to that, tell me the trigger, because this is something I haven't understood. What's the trigger for when an account is sent over to one of those firms? Is it a certain amount that you become delinquent in? Is it a length of time that you become delinquent in? And right now, is every residential and commercial account that we should be collecting on, have we sent those to those firms that are doing the business to collect? Because this is what happened. I'm in Alany and East Oak Lane this past Saturday, and we're going through the budget proposal, and we're talking about what we need to fund the schools, and we're talking about a proposed increase in property taxes, and the folks say, wait a minute, Sherelle, are we maxing out on our ability to collect the delinquent property taxes? So I go through the spiel about the legislation. I talk about what, the great job that I think you all are doing. I didn't have the data to confirm whether or not the firms who are working to collect for us, how successful they've been. But then the billion-dollar question is, well, Sherelle, has the city sent those firms all of the accounts and given them the opportunity to collect so that we can measure what they are? And I couldn't answer that question. Tell me, what do I say when I go back?
So everything that's delinquent is in a collection status.
Everything?
Yes.
Commercial and residential?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, it's not all with firms, because we keep some internal for our law department to do collections on. So basically,
go right there, Commish. Internal for law department. Help me understand what's the trigger for what delinquent residential and commercial accounts are given to those firms who we hire to do that work, and then what's the rationale or trigger or methodology for keeping them in-house to let the law department collect?
well, first of all, there's I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but there's a different collection rate internally, and this gets passed along to the homeowner. So our internal attorney's fee is 6%.
6%. Internal fee.
Internal fee. Our two co-counsel's rate is 18%.
18%.
Which gets passed along. So what we basically do is take the accounts that we think are essentially the easiest collection, and we keep those in-house, and we work those. The ones that are going to take the more significant effort are divided equally between the two vendors. So it's as simple as that. You know, law department takes their piece, what's left gets divided in half and goes out to the two vendors.
So one, now let me thank you for just answering the complex question in plain English, right? So I appreciate that, but this is what I'm going to ask, and Mr. Chairman, I'll be done. I get the internal rate at 6%, the 18% fee that is charged by these firms. My question, and that the easier accounts are given where we can pay the lower amount, the 6%, right? We tried to do it in-house because it should be easier to collect. What I would like to see is, can we measure the effectiveness and or the success of, and the time period? Because if we're talking about, let's just say if there was an additional 200, 250, 300 million out there in delinquent accounts, that we could be getting that money in, let's say within the next 12 to 24 months, that we could have on our books that amount of money that we need to help address this school district crisis that we have right now. Not that it goes away, but it is significantly. We started at 966. What's the number now? 674? 670? 660, 670, right? So now we move down. Imagine if you can, I don't care if it's via internally or externally, we measure how fast we would be able to collect that revenue, we could decrease that amount. Right?
And that's something we're looking at. We're always looking at the collection rate of our vendors and our internal collection rate to maximize that. In addition, starting about 5 years ago, we started a new process where on the real estate taxes are due March 31st, and effective April 1st, they're overdue. They're not yet delinquent. They don't become delinquent until the beginning of the next year, but they're overdue. They used to sit until they became delinquent and then go out and go through the process we just talked about. Now, as soon as they become overdue, we send those out, not to law firms, but to collection agencies. And they'll start getting noticing during the year, and that noticing ramps up until about November. And when in November, we send them all essentially a final letter that says, if you don't pay before December 31st, bad things are going to happen in terms of, there's going to be a lien on your house, you're going to get legal fees, and that's been really effective. So we're kind of on board with what we're saying. We're trying to jump on them as soon as they're overdue, get them out to collectors, start the process. So we're starting the process much earlier than we used to. We're keeping it with those collectors. We have 2 collectors doing that portfolio. We measure both of those. We make it competitive. We let them know if one's outperforming the other. We let them know where they should be. That's been very effective for us. Over the last 5 years, the total principal has been reduced by 31%, and the number of delinquent accounts has been reduced by over 20%. Our collection rate in the year of the levy is at a new high, 95.5%, and we're trending higher in the current year. So we're really excited about that. So I think, we have a strategy. We've been utilizing it over the last several years. It's really paying its dividends, and I think that we are maximizing our collections.
So Commissioner, thank you for your response. I support your efforts, particularly that anything that we can collect, and we can collect it 12% lower than the private sector can do it, I want to do it. But I also understand the importance of the timeliness of it. So if there is an additional $250 to $300 million, I would love to see a cost-benefit analysis of how long it would take us to collect it and how much it would cost at 6% versus what it would cost if we did it outside. And then that would help us understand how we communicate with our constituency about that. Because again, just think of the number. We moved from 966 down to 650, and we're still talking about a potential 4.1% increase. And folks are asking questions about it. My people are. I can't speak for any other district. My people. In addition to that, this council is going to be asked to make the tough decision about whatever the package will look like. So if you could, Commissioner, send that information to us, then you give me the data that I need to go out and make the case for what I feel like the city's plan should be. Okay. Thank you so very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Jones.
First of all, let me thank my colleague for making us aware of this, because I just found out that my senator, my good friend, asked for the same data. I do not understand, and we're in good communication. We're in constant communication why the city council person, the district council person would not be made aware of this. I wasn't blindsided like Parker was by a constituent. These kinds of things, when we go to public forums, particularly when we're going to be asked to make cases about taxing, about city taxing, how do we get to a point where the state is creating pilot programs for local taxes in our respective districts? I don't get that. So how did we get here?
Well, I think, again, this was a communication problem, and it's a lesson learned. I mean, I think we have good communication in general with City Council, and this was a situation where I guess we got ahead of ourselves in our zeal for collection efforts and to get the word out there. And this was all, I will say also, this was all around the owner-occupied payment agreement. So it wasn't a heavy-handed collection effort, but it was trying to,
So was there a letter sent out to constituents?
not by revenue, but by the
Well, by
state
who?
representatives. We furnished them with the data.
So they fashioned a letter for city taxes. Do you have a copy of it?
We can
Of what
provide a
went out?
copy. Yeah.
Because, I mean, when I tell you me and Senator Hughes are tight, we are tight. However, we ain't that tight. To use colloquial ebonics, we're not that tight. So I need to know what that letter was that went out to my constituents. Councilwoman Parker talked about her district being the #1 district for those types of agreements. Where does the 4th district stand?
So in the 4th district, 32% of delinquent accounts are in payment agreements. And so that puts you in second place.
Second place.
I like that. And as it should be. Who's in first?
In first place is Councilwoman Parker's district, she at 41%.
And so we're in second place. All right. So how does that translate? How many letters went out in the 4th district?
They didn't go out from us, but we could certainly find out and get that information to you.
Okay. Because we're doing town meetings, we're doing budget sessions. The other day, I was up in the 21st Ward, and, first question came out of everyone's collective thought was, you're raising our taxes based on general assessments, 11% citywide, but up there, maybe 35%. And on top of that, we may well be asked to pay an additional 4% on top of that. And then I'm hearing about these collections that, I mean, this should have nothing to do with politics, but we are running next year. Can we at least know when we're knocking on people's doors, constituents' doors? Hi, I'm Councilman Jones. We just sent you out a threatening letter about taking you home if you don't collect. I mean, that's not the first thing I'd like to lead with. So that kind of communications is essential. And to my good friends in the state House and Senate, I don't go around asking about state taxes. And, I mean, there is a reason why there is a separation. And unless they're going to, on their end, raise some taxes to solve some of the local problems, such as the school district, let them, they have a Department of Revenue up there, don't they?
They do.
Well, they can play with them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, please. Excuse me.
Thank you. Good morning, Revenue.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Parker, in many ways, teed up my line of questioning. I have some additional questions that are a result of the responses you shared this morning. So where shall I start? You say that the internal fee is 6% for what the city collects, correct?
Correct.
And that for your vendors is 18%.
That's correct.
You also stated, if my notes are accurate here, that you analyze what the collection firms do. So let's get behind that statement. What do you analyze?
We look at how much is in their portfolio
How much is in the portfolio? Okay.
and how much they are collecting. Now, it gets a little complex because the portfolio is changing. You know, we're getting ready to do referrals now as more,
Let's stay with what is as we speak.
Okay.
Not about what the future holds, because this testimony, this hearing is currently based on the practices currently in place. Is that fair to say?
yes.
Okay, all right. So the analysis is tied to how much is in their portfolio and how well they are doing at collections. You gave the number 95.9% collection rates for whom? The city or the vendors?
That's our general number before it becomes delinquent. So
Okay.
how much of the real estate taxes is collected in the year of the levy?
Okay, let's get behind that number. Break that down. What percentage of that is the city's rate of collection and what percentage of
That's
that
all.
is tied to the vendors?
That's all before anything
Total.
goes out to the vendor.
Okay, before anything goes out, okay. Now, you also stated that,
Let me clarify
Please.
that, because that's before it goes out to the vendors we're talking about at the, for the legal services, at the 18%. But I did talk about how as soon as it becomes overdue, it goes out to collection agencies.
yes,
So it will have gone out to the collection agencies, but not to the legal services vendors, because we have collection agencies that are collecting it when it's overdue. Like
Okay.
effective April 1st, they collect it till December 1st.
Okay.
December 31st. Then on January 1, it's considered delinquent. Then we pull it all back from those two collection agencies, and we get it ready to split, the split that I talked about with Councilwoman Parker, where we keep the third and the other 2/3 goes out to the vendors. So that 95.5 is in that first year, from the time the bills go out through December 31st, 95.5% is collected.
okay, I'm trying to follow that. You stated that X portion, and you'll have to tell me what X is, goes to the law department. So what goes to the law department when?
Basically, it's not exactly, but essentially a third stays with the law department. They go through the delinquency, establish what they want to keep internal for them, and then what's left gets split evenly and goes out. And those referrals will go out in approximately late March, early April.
Okay. You also stated that the easiest collection stays in-house. Define easiest.
Please identify yourself.
Good morning. I'm Frances Beckley. I'm Chief Counsel to the Revenue Department. We have been working to diversify the tools that we use, and one of the things that we're really pleased with is a program called sequestration, which can be used before foreclosure. It's cheaper, it's faster. What we do is we take a delinquent property, if it's delinquent in its real estate taxes, and we petition the court to appoint a sequestrator, which is like a receiver, to take the rental income from that property, and the court puts the sequestrator in for as long as it takes for the difference between the expenses of the property and the rent from the property to pay off the real estate taxes. The beautiful thing with that is that even by sending a letter to landlords telling them that we're going to put them in this program, typically they will pay us either in full or enter into a payment agreement. We have about a 75% success rate from that program, and it brings in currently roughly $1.5 million a month. It also is a more desirable outcome for rental properties because, unlike foreclosure, it doesn't break the leases, so it doesn't allow the landlords. It has no impact on the tenants. So when we met with the eviction task force, they were very pleased to hear that whenever we find and can identify a property as a rental property, we put it through the sequestration process before it goes to foreclosure. Only the quarter of the properties that we aren't able to solve through sequestration will then be referred to foreclosure.
Now, the process that you just articulated, that's that 5%, that doesn't get collected?
Yes, well, everything we're discussing now has to do with delinquent property taxes, which are taxes that are not paid in the year that they're due. Under state law, they have a different status on January 1st of the next year. that allows us to use both sequestration and foreclosure. Those processes are not available for taxes that are only overdue, only for taxes that are delinquent.
Okay, let me back up a little bit. I'm surprised I'm going this long. That bell gonna ring soon?
You're on.
So I have here paperwork that indicates that the city allegedly has $400 million in delinquent real estate taxes. Is that true?
Okay. I can start with the number that there is about $158 million in active delinquent principal. And so that is sort of the most collectible portion. Overall, real estate taxes due is another $40 million in principal. So active is within the past 10 years. Inactive is the older debt, older than that. And so together it's about $200 million in principal. And then when you get to include all of the interest and penalties, you get to a number that is
What about the other two? So you're saying the $400 million is not true since September 2017?
I'm sorry, one moment. Small print, old eyes. If I did it in pink and purple, it'd jump out at me. 426, including all interest and penalties across all years. Thank you.
Okay, have all those addresses been verified?
So one of the things that we've put in the past couple of years is a data warehouse, and within that we add in data purification that helps us go through and make sure that we have correct addresses. It's also incumbent though for folks who aren't using the property address as their mailing address, they need to make sure they update us, and that certainly is a challenge that if folks move or are using an off-site address, getting the bill to them is clearly the very first step in getting the bill to pay. So that's one of the things that we really encourage folks to do is make sure that they've got accurate addresses for any off-site mailing address on file with us.
Encourage how?
Well, so when we do find them, we, all of our, co-counsel and folks, they do skip tracing, try and track folks down and use outside tools to find them if they haven't found us first. But whenever anyone calls in with a question, our call takers in our call center will prompt folks to get their most recent contact information so that we're constantly trying to refresh and update that data.
I can't imagine the challenge that can be.
In addition, we're also working internally with the Records Department, Office of Property Data, Office of Property Assessments. We've put a task force together, and basically it's a property data task force.
So that's
to clean
probably
up.
it's a fluid process, and
It
that is
certainly
never
is,
done.
yes.
Never done.
So it's fair to say that what percent is verified? 90%, 95%? Help me out.
I don't have a percentage, but the
Okay.
vast majority.
How much of the figure represents nonprofits like churches? How much of that 426 million represents nonprofits/churches?
So that's a really challenging question because if they've been gone through the process with the Office of Property Assessment as a nonprofit that is exempt from taxation, there should be no delinquent balance. The challenge comes when there are nonprofit entities that haven't had that verification. And so oftentimes as they move through the process, really the only way that we're able to know that something is amiss there is a name. Is trying to look at what the name is on that property. And so as it moves through the collection process, that surfaces.
How much of that figure represents properties in bankruptcy?
There is about $3.3 million worth of principal in bankruptcy. I believe it's a little less than 2% of the total delinquency. And we can get back to you with the exact figures, the most recent ones. I believe those numbers are from the end of FY17.
The bell has rung, but I really would like to know what the number is of nonprofits and exempts, period. Can you get back to us with that number?
Yeah, we can try. As
All right,
Marissa said,
try is not an affirmative.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge to identify those sometimes within because they're not classified always as a nonprofit in our system. But we'll get something back to you.
So then, lastly, it's difficult to say then that 426 million is truly reflective of delinquent real estate taxes if we don't know what percentage of that are nonprofits. And well, we do know that 3.3 million is bankruptcy, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, and what you're referring to really is you're getting to our actionable portion of the delinquency. Essentially, 38% of the delinquency is not actionable. And not actionable is things like bankruptcy, TRB appeals, they're in a payment agreement. That makes up the majority of it. So, so that's not all of the $400 million.
So clearly, this is a convoluted, complex, layered issue. My ask is that you provide for me or to the chair. I'm a very visual learner. So I would really like to see, you articulated several layers of actions of activity that can happen once a property goes into delinquency. So some kind of grid or flow chart that simplifies and reduces to the common denominator what that looks like, if it's a bankruptcy, if it's a nonprofit, if it's, you've mentioned several different actions. I need to see that to get a real clear understanding on why a third still stays with the city and doesn't go to the agencies that are in the business of doing this for a living. That concludes my first round of questions.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman. If I could ask real quickly on the issue that Councilwoman Parker brought up, just so I'm clear, because I think it caught a lot of us off guard. We weren't aware of this. Was this a program just in the 9th District, or was this?
It was really just a one-off to see if it was effective.
Okay.
To see if it resulted in folks being able to enter into the owner-occupied payment agreement program so that they would no longer be at risk of foreclosure.
But it wasn't just the 9th District at that point?
It was there first, and then
Okay.
I think word might have gotten around in Harrisburg, or that that it might be something. But we certainly apologize and would make sure in the future that everyone here would be engaged well before.
And I was going to use the word everybody here, because obviously a district council person needs to know what's going on in his or her district, but those of us at large have phones too, and we walk out on the street too, and we hear from people too. So I think if there's a program, I think, with all due respect, I think all 17 of us should know.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilman Dom?
And good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I want to thank you, Commissioner Breslin, and Deputy Revenue Commissioner Michelle Bethel, and First Deputy Commissioner Marissa Waxman, and I know that Deputy Commissioner Marco is sitting in the audience, and you too, Francis Beckley, for all that you do in your department. As I will say, I've worked with you all very closely these last 2.5 years or so, and I think you're doing a very good job, and I am proud to have you in our Revenue Department. I'm not saying it's always perfect, nothing ever is, and mistakes happen, but I'm proud of it. But I do have a few questions, and Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds-Brown, this may help clarify some of your questions. And I'm also supportive of my colleagues, Councilmember Sherelle Parker and Councilman Curtis Jones, in knowing about it. But the other side of the coin is I'm happy that you had the creativity to come up with a new program, okay? So while we made a mistake in not notifying, I don't want to stifle the creativity of coming up with new pilot programs. I think that's good. I think we need more of that in government. Having said that, the figures that because we talk about this weekly or daily or whatever, but I just want to put on the record the figures and some of the information so we can have it out there and look at it. But as I understand this right now, in our budget process, we need about $660 million. And the administration's proposal is a 4.1% increase in the real estate taxes. It's a increase in the transfer tax of about 8%, and a freeze in the wage taxes that have been slightly reducing over time to get us to that goal. But I do believe, and I've said this is no secret, before we do any of those things, we should be collecting the delinquent taxes and making sure that our current taxes we've collected are managed efficiently. Having said that, I think at this moment in time, I think that, Marissa, you mentioned it's 426 million delinquent. And Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds-Brown, when I looked at this figure 2 years ago, the city had a valuation, roughly a valuation of the whole city. 30% of the city didn't pay any real estate taxes. So they were not, the nonprofits are not in that delinquency, usually unless there's a mistake. So 30% don't pay real estate taxes, 26% of our population's in poverty, and 44% pay the full boat. That's how it looked 2 years ago. And in the last 2 years, when you look at what OPA has done, they really have not moved the needle on any of the properties that we don't tax. They're still the same values pretty much. So that's the context. And the amount of dollars outstanding I understand it's $426 million, and for those who may be listening, real estate taxes, typically we only go back 10 years, but real estate taxes are a first lien on real estate. They come before the lender. We'll get paid. We're in the best position possible. We are in the best position possible. We come before a lender. So when you go back and you take all the old delinquency, including more than 10 years, that total delinquency is $426 million, and the residents are right. We should make every effort to collect it. And I will say this, the administration, including the mayor, want us to collect these taxes and have been supportive of tools and measures to collect real estate taxes. So there shouldn't be any knock on the administration or the mayor for the collection of real estate taxes. They're on board. So here's where we are. We have $426 million of delinquent taxes. We have, I think, and you can verify this, but I know we've gone over this 16,000 times. We have about 124 to 126 million in payment programs. So they're not available to us, basically. And those people are counted as current because they're in a payment program, which is good. By the way, we want to increase our collection rate because it's one of the drivers of our bond rating. Of course, pensions and cash reserves are the bigger ones, but delinquency plays a role. There's $300 million out there, basically. And there's two pieces of this collection. It is the old stuff, and there's increasing the rate. And the rate is right now, which is the best I've ever seen in the city, 95.5. Congratulations to you and your department. But there is an option here to collect the $300 million. So what does that consist of? 67,000 delinquent properties. 16,000 owner-occupied, we believe. 51,000 not owner-occupied. It's almost 75% not owner-occupied. 67,000 delinquent properties, 16,000 owner-occupied, 51,000 not owner-occupied. There's an opportunity to do two things. One, to give the Revenue Department a tool, and they have like 20 tools, and they keep coming up with more tools, which is great. We applaud the creativity. Give them another tool to collect delinquent taxes. And you probably know what I'm referring to, and that is the collection method that has been utilized in New York City, where their rate is 99%. And what's the benefit of this? Number one, we could increase our collection rate by 2 points. What's that benefit? $30 million a year. What's that benefit in a 5-year program? $150 million over 5 years. What's the second benefit? Maybe collecting a portion of the back taxes. We're not going to get it all, and if we're lucky, we might get 25%. But even 25% is $75 million. So there's a lot here of options. We talked about the rates. When a taxpayer goes delinquent and we assign it to an outside collection firm, the rate is 18% plus expenses. Under the New York method, we believe the calculated rate would be somewhere between 6 and 8%. Over the last 8 years, the residents, not us, the residents of the city have paid $52 million in fees to collection firms. If we adopted the program that we've been talking about, the fees could be dramatically lower, maybe 14 or 15 million. But here's the big benefit. The program we're talking about, which we're trying to get a hearing on, has a mechanism where we send out notices. We send out 4 notices, a 90-day, a 60, a 30, and a 10-day notice. And after the 4th notice in New York, 85% of the people pay their taxes after the 4th notice. And by the way, the Revenue Department, was it like 3 years ago, did something similar, send out 1 notice. And if I recall, 50 to 55% of the people pay their taxes. So it's the marketing and it's the noticing, and we should be doing this before we raise anyone's taxes. So in summation, I didn't even ask you a question, I've just been talking.
I'm
sorry
fine.
about that. I don't know if I should do that or not.
You're on a roll.
Okay. You know, really, and Frances Beckley said it really well. I'm glad she came up and spoke about sequestration, because that is a term that most people don't understand. But I understand the issues. We're not going after any owner occupants here. This excludes owner occupants. Then there's a concern of investment properties, lower income. And Frances Beckley said it beautifully. We have sequestration, which is basically a program where we have investor-owned properties. The residents are redirected, the tenants, to pay their rents to the Revenue Department so they can offset the taxes. So that's not losing a home. But when you have so many people who decide not to pay us, We need to give revenue that extra tool. I have examples of people I can show you. The guy owns 66 properties. I actually thought he owned 33. I was wrong. He owns 66 that are delinquent. He lives out in the suburbs. We have people that owe us a lot of money. And I guess my time at this first round is just to put all those facts on the table. I introduced a bill 4 or 5 weeks ago, which was a similar bill with one major change, and that is on the front of the bill it says owner occupants excluded. And with sequestration, it protects low-income homeowners. And my question is, if owner occupants are excluded and we have sequestration for investor-owned properties that are lower income, why are we not moving forward and collecting delinquent taxes from those people who choose not to pay? I'm going to end on that note. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Sanchez.
You don't need a hearing, because you just did your whole testimony, although I don't want to have a policy debate, because I think Councilman Dom has done a fabulous job in bringing this issue forward, but I feel compelled to put some stuff on the record also. I do think the city has done a much better job in its collection strategies. If you read the reports, Council's proactiveness on UPA and LOOP and other things has led to the protection of homeowners, which is a core value, I think, of this council, and of folks in poverty who, despite poverty, have home ownership rate. And I am not against collecting all taxes, because like the councilman said, we hear that constantly with folks. How can you increase our taxes if you're not collecting the delinquency? But there are a couple of issues that are become hugely important that the administration has failed to answer, or we have not put our hands around, is, we have thousands of properties in the private sector hands that are PHA low-income properties. And anytime we begin to nickel and dime that sector, who is in the low-income housing world, there is a consequence, particularly in changing neighborhoods, about their willingness to participate in those programs. And I think that's an issue that the councilman and I have talked about. I know we've talked about it with revenue. When you have that many properties, we have to be careful that one of the things we learned through the mortgage foreclosure is that there's going to be a long-term need for affordable rentals. And we need to protect that constituency in a way. So it's not an either or, but it definitely is, can have damaging consequences. I will share with the chair, I sent an extensive list request to revenue, and they responded. I have a letter dated March 20th with a lot of the questions that I had posed to the councilman and to revenue around putting our hands around the data and the information around our payment plans, who's paying and who's not paying, who are the big delinquent guys. And I must say that I was astonished at the fact that we know who our biggest delinquent folks are. And just to give you an example, one of the things that popped out of the delinquent accounts at the tune of $4.2 million was Marriott Corporation. And so when we look at this, the top delinquencies, we know who they are, we know where they are. And so the question is, as we improve on our collection rate, what is it that we're doing differently? What is the methodology to go after these huge accounts that represent the largest part of this portfolio?
Well, one of the things that we've been doing for the past couple of years now is I meet quarterly with different groups. Mm-hmm. We break the delinquencies into categories: real estate tax, business tax, others. And we meet quarterly and go over essentially the top 100 every quarter, and go through the list of those delinquents. And the purpose of that meeting is to see that there's movement, that we don't have a static group of delinquents that are out there. So we look at a couple things. We look at who's on the list, mm-hmm. who's moving off the list, mm-hmm. who's coming on to the list, and the ones that are on the list, what is the status and what do we need to do to keep it moving along in the collection process. And I think that has been, that's been very helpful. It's been
So
helpful
what
for
percentage,
me.
going back to what Councilwoman Parker was saying, what is the effectiveness of the methodology around those collections, right? If you have a quarterly meeting and we have the top 50 guys, what is it that we do in those 3 months for collection, and how effective is it?
Well, that's what we're using this to determine. So that's the purpose of the meeting, for me to hear what is the plan on this collection. And then to follow up in 3 months and say, what has happened, how effective is that? And basically to move it through the process, you know, so what is the status? Now, some of them are in that inactionable mode, and we broke different things down here, different categories, but, okay. And they're just giving me the information. The Marriott is a perfect example that has now been closed and collected. So, and that's kind of the process. We look at that, you know, the concern was that there's accounts maybe that had been sitting there and weren't getting attention and just would languish, or that somebody would walk it through is not the right term, but follow through the collection process. And then at the end, if they didn't collect it, move on to the next case, and it would sit there, and then it's just stagnant, and it's going to be there until somebody else works it, and then we're going to come to the same solution. So what we found is, you know, by following up every 3 months, we're going to move these accounts. We're going to first figure out if there's a reason why it's on there and we can't do anything, and we note those. It might be in appeal. So we're waiting, and every 3 months we're waiting to see when that comes out of appeal, and when it does, we'll be on the collection if it's found in favor of the city. If we put it into another collection status, we'll follow up in 3 months and say, okay, that didn't work, it's still there, what is the status,
So-
what can we do? Essentially, we may move it to a write-off. It might be something that's there, it's really old, law opines that they've done everything they can possibly do. Usually, the final step of that is we brought on 2 firms to execute on judgments. So it's kind of the last, and Francis, maybe you want to speak to that a little bit.
You're
But
taking
that's-
up all my time. Let me
I'm
get
sorry.
some more questions in.
It's a complicated question, and I
It is a
apologize. I'm trying
complicated,
to
and
be-
I have a document, and I'll put it on the
Okay.
record, because I think it really speaks to where you've made progress, right? I think there's been a lot of progress, and you know, I want to get to the bigger accounts and that big number of 200 whatever million. But for me, is like really narrowing down on the methodology. You know, as part of our work 10 years ago with the freshmen, you know, we spent a lot of time working with Rob around auditing, around all of the pieces, because we knew that we weren't consistent in our methodology. We talked about, you know, when do we send stuff to outside counsel? When does it stay internally? So to me, what was missing in this response was, what is the current methodology? And to Councilwoman Parker's is, how do accounts age, right? And who has them at what point? What is the most efficiency based not only on cost, but around collections? And I think we've gotten to a place where the Revenue Department really has to define that, right? Because in all of your responses back, depending on the account, I think there was still a lot of nuances to, this is how we're going to use our outside capacity. This is our internal capacity, and I know that you prescribe to wanting to build some internal capacity, and how do those accounts age, right? And so I think that's one of the things that has to be clearer to us. I'm all for new strategies, right? I know when Clarina Tolson was there, she tried a few things. We tried some stuff around outside counsel, right? There was a story recently in the paper. There was some discovery work done around that. So no one wants to hamper your ability to be creative, but I do think that we need to be consistent in the methodology. Based on your memo, in your responses, you know, we're getting better at knowing who owes. And so I just want to be clear that we're being focused on who owes, particularly when they owe those big numbers, right? And getting them to settle if we have the capacity to do it internally or externally, right? Because I don't care if Marriott pays 18% in collection, right? I would care if a homeowner does, right? Because you guys know where my priorities are as it relates to that. But I just think that we need to narrow that methodology in a way that we can explain it to folks that we're clear about it, and that people do see progress in the context of a consistent methodology around that. I want to speak to the enrollment, and I know we've been talking about getting more creative on enrollment. How are we closing the loop between people who get in tax payments who may not have homestead, and why is that not happening when we're enrolling people, whether it's to the TAP program, whether it's to the UPA or LOOP? How are we closing that loop?
So we absolutely hear you. We've got about 78% of homeowners are enrolled in our programs, the assistance, the relief programs on the real estate side, and obviously Michelle can talk to the water side, which is great, but it's not enough. And so some things we are doing for folks who are in a tax program such as the senior freeze, or they're in UPA, but we found they didn't have homestead, we've been able to auto-enroll them because we already know they meet the criteria. So already 3,000 homeowners who are in those programs that predated.
When did that happen?
I would say August. The answer is August.
Did we retro that back to when they entered a tax payment plan?
I will be able to get that information for you and we can forward that.
That's an important point, and I want my colleagues to understand that. We were putting people into payment plans who were eligible for homestead and other stuff, and we didn't capture that. With one step, we enrolled 3,000 people. So my argument is we have a lot more capacity than we're exercising.
Yeah, and so we are working hard on that. In the past year, the city won a grant from the Knight Foundation to help us look at this better. There also is a team of students from Temple who spent the past semester, and I see one of them who is your staffer here, looking at how do we try and get to a point where there's one form that you fill out and get all these programs. And there are some challenges with that. Some of these programs have different definitions of what counts for income, because some mirror a state program for seniors, while others mirror utility programs so that they all match up. And so there's some real challenges there, but we're really excited about continuing to work through those to reduce any barrier that if you manage to get in the door and start the process in one program, we can really figure out all the programs you're eligible for.
What's the timeline for that?
So we're actually reviewing some of the information we got from that team right now to see what are action steps and figuring out what we can put folks on over the summer to take some of those first steps. It's possible, though, there may be some legislative changes we need to sort of sync up those definitions around what is income. Because right now, if we asked a person, say, can you put your household income on a TAP form, they could write down $15,000, but if we asked them to put their income down on a loop form, the answer would actually be $17,000, and that's just because the definitions in the legislation don't quite sync up. So there are some challenges there that are big, but there's also things that we right now can do by reaching out, data sharing among departments, so that where we can make incremental progress, we want to make that as quick as possible, but we also want to understand the big picture so we can all get to the vision of sort of one door into assistance programs.
Okay, my time is up, I know. Come back.
Thank you, Councilwoman, thank you. Councilman Green, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to follow up on some of the questions that Councilman Sanchez and Parker have asked already. I want to get some more specific details. For aging for delinquent taxes, at what time period do they get referred out to outside counsel?
For real estate tax?
Mm-hmm.
So they go out, they're due, the real estate taxes are due March 31st. By June, they're overdue April 1st. By June, we have them out with 2 collection agencies.
Okay, so you're saying that by June 1st?
June, the date has varied, but generally in June, that referral will go out.
So you're saying that that referral is going out to outside collection agencies June 1st, and that the city is not trying to collect?
No, we are. The reason for the delay is once it becomes overdue, we want to send one bill out from the Department of Revenue, one delinquent bill, and give them an opportunity, one overdue bill, and allow them to pay us directly. So we do that. Once we've established that, given it time for the due date and processing time, then we get the referral out to the 2 collection agencies. They work it through December 31st, series of letters and calls, but in November they do kind of that notice that I referred to, that last notice, kind of the dire notice that says, if you don't pay by December 31st, you're going to have attorney's fees and a lien placed on your property, and that generates a flurry of payments. And then January 1st, we pull it all back from the collection agencies, and then we go through that division and get it ready to go out to our co-counsel. And that goes out in, essentially March, April, we get it back out to co-counsel, and then they collect.
Okay, so you're using collection agencies from June 1st to the end of December,
Yes,
and then you're pulling it back, and then once you go into the new year, then you're sending it out to collection firms?
yes, which are law firms.
Right, law firms, okay.
You know.
And the collection agencies that you're using, those are agencies you've done an RFP process that you've been working with over the years?
Yes.
Okay. And so at no point is there any delinquent bill that has occurred prior to June 1st still staying within the city of Philadelphia? It's all going to collection agency. So as of June 1st, any delinquency is going out to a collection agency?
It all goes out.
And not staying internally?
It all goes out.
Okay. And then doesn't go to the collection firms until basically January of next year, after you've given a time period for collection agencies to collect?
That's correct.
Is there a reason why we are using collection agencies at one point and then in January going to collection firms?
Yes, because when it's overdue, it really isn't ready to go into the foreclosure process. So that's more of a legal process, and it's why we use law firms in the January 1st when we put it out. But we use, we can use standard collection agencies. And the other thing is, we're essentially incurring the fee during that period of time. We're not passing an attorney fee on to the taxpayer. And we found that to be a really effective time period. There's a real opportunity there to collect during that overdue period. Great benefit for the taxpayer who may just, for whatever financial reasons, is late and behind to get caught up before the liens are on and the attorney's fees are on. And so, as I said, we started that in 2012. Prior to 2012, we allowed it to just kind of sit with the city and bill it over the year and then put it out with the collection firms the following year when it was delinquent. And we found that it was a real opportunity missed, and this has been really successful for us.
And so it sounds like in December, before it goes out to collection firms, when you send that kind of last notice, you're getting an increase in collections?
Yes.
Is there a reason why we're waiting until December and not trying to do that earlier?
Well, we do it earlier, but, I guess it's human nature for people to just procrastinate, and they put it off, and then that's like that final notice to let them know that this is it. If you don't do it now, January 1, there's no going back. You'll have a lien and you'll have attorney's fees. So people are kind of waiting to that point to do it. We've worked with University of Pennsylvania, did a behavioral science study, worked on different types of noticing, and we continue to do that kind of work to find out what noticing is most effective.
But considering that people have a tendency to wait till last minute procrastinate, would it not make sense to maybe move up that time period by a couple months, knowing that you're going to get more money earlier if you let people know this is the last notice?
We can certainly play with the
as
dates.
opposed to December, maybe, as opposed to December, maybe we did September and then and then after people don't respond after September last notice, then send the collection firms earlier. Because that would get us money quicker because we're short on time period. Now, granted, some people are dealing with financial issues and other challenges, but I think that once you get to a certain time period, especially when you're talking September from a bill that was due in April, and you say this is your last notice, and then it's going to go to collection agencies, and then start moving forward, then I think you probably get more money, as opposed to there's clearly a period of time that people are just waiting for that. I'm going to wait till I get my final notice.
No.
So as opposed to giving them more time to get that final notice, why don't we push up that final notice period earlier, and then you can probably collect more.
Yeah, we'll give that a try.
Because those who are going to pay, they're going to pay. Those who have challenges in paying, they're still going to have challenges in paying regardless if it's September or December.
That'd be an interesting project to try that and measure the difference in the collection.
Okay. Also, one of the concerns I've had, and my understanding is about 30% of the eligible property owners in the city do not have the homestead exemption. And so what are we doing to, and I understand the different types of the income reporting because of state programs versus local programs, but I still have a major concern on us not using tools at our disposal to better inform constituents of the programs we have. I know we have a lot of different programs with UPA and LOOP. We just announced a new initiative yesterday working with Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency and Community Legal Services, which is great, but my concern is that we're not getting information out to enough people, and it's these one-off events, and people are not knowledgeable of all these type of programs.
So that is a continuing challenge for us. How do we get, we're at about 78% of homeowners are enrolled in these programs, but there's still 22% that we're trying to reach. And so we have a built-out communications plan that includes the one-off community events. This year we did 174, which was about 40 more than the year before. And those are important, but we're also doing a number of things that we're trying to reach folks where they are. So we recently did a program that we call Tacos and Taxes, where we worked with the council president's office, where we did direct invitations to targeted folks to see if we could get them in, and with the lure of some snacks, we figured that actually might be a thing that really works, and made sure that we brought our services as well as partners from Community Legal Services and others right into the neighborhood with the district council person, and so that was successful in the 5th, and it's something that we're going to try and reach out to other council members to roll out. Other things we've done is within the past year, we added a content manager for our website who happens to be trilingual, which means we're getting a lot more content out there in ways that folks can access it. So rather than, dense text, legalese, information on our website, we've got more videos, we've got blog posts in multiple languages, and we're trying really hard to reach people in the way they want. Recently, we launched our own YouTube channel, and on a per capita basis, we are only slightly trailing who are some of the top-notch Department of Revenue YouTubers in the country, Minnesota and New York State, on a per capita basis, where our subscribers are getting up there. We recently actually posted a throwback video you did for the homestead exemption, which we really appreciated. So one thing, we have been trying to be more creative in how we reach folks. We're really open to ideas and experimenting. We've already mentioned behavioral science a couple times. We really want to try and test and see what is the most effective. So we'll do something and try and send out a letter 2 different ways to try and figure out which one is more effective at reaching folks. We did projects a couple years back where we messed with, does a large envelope with handwriting on it work better than a green envelope that's normal size to get folks, to get senior citizens to enroll in a water discount program. So we're constantly experimenting, and we're constantly trying to find new partners to work with us.
I mean, just coming up with some type of branding campaign regarding ways you can reduce your taxes. You can work with, either internally or maybe even reach out to those externally that just want to see a benefit in the city. Some type of branding marketing campaign that's a short tagline that people can use and remember, and then constantly repeating it, because it sounds like there's been a lot of different stops and starts, but in order for marketing to be successful, it's got to be a simple, succinct message that's repeated over and over and over again. There's a reason why GPTMC now visits Philadelphia, that does the XOXO with love. I mean, they've kind of used that brand and used it consistently. And also working with the district council members. I know Councilman Parker had a very engaging conversation with you earlier. She does town hall meetings, a number of other council members do town hall meetings, budget hearings. I mean, I think we have housing counseling agencies in the city, a lot of nonprofits, but if you have just a consistent message and then asking people to get that information out on a consistent basis to all of these different channels, I think will be helpful. Part of the reason why I did the PSA on the homestead exemption and done a lot of Facebook Live posts, because people don't know about these programs. I've had people from different income levels. A friend of mine who's recently purchased a home and forgot about the homestead exemption and came up to me after a budget hearing and said, "Thanks for doing that post, because I just remembered doing the homestead exemption. I kind of forgot about it." So people have a tendency to forget things at times, but we're going to have to constantly remind them, and I don't think we're using all the tools or all the arrows in our quiver. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Heenan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to City Council.
Thank
you. But I do want to start off by recognizing the changes and the progress that you and the team has made together. I think when when I first started to serve, along with colleagues, we were at like 92+% on its collection rate. And, to move the needle, for the right reasons, for the department, for the efficiency of the city and for the general public, we're now at 95.5, and, we want to get up to 98. Is that our ultimate goal? 98?
100 is always the goal, but, yeah,
100, but
98 would be nice.
realistically, if we get to 98, I think that's an attainable goal on the path that we're taking. And, it's interesting that where we were then and where we are now. I mean, because we were going through AVI and the changes in our real estate actual value of our real property here in the city of Philadelphia, and to current, we're trying to tweak and modify and adjust as we go on where we see problems. Hence, a lot of the programs for people protection, right? For people who, you don't want to put out on the street, or people who want to get into payment programs, people whose real estate taxes have gone up, 400%. When we started at a 300% qualification for some of them. But would it be fair to say that when recognizing different solutions or identified problems, that you're able to work things out and adjust? Would that be a fair statement?
I think so, yes.
I think so. Okay, so in 2012, with the change to AVI, there's $1 billion in uncollected taxes, and then there was $800 million in uncollected taxes, and then there's $600 million in uncollected. And today, nothing is inconsequential. I mean, everything really, every penny, every dollar, everything counts for our core services as City of Philadelphia, without putting an undue burden on additional taxes, collective revenue from our residents. But we are now, I think, sifting through all that, and we have an actual number of just principal only of approximately $200 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so as we progressively get sharper and better and use technology to our advantage, there was one thing that I heard several years ago, and I haven't heard much until today's hearing, is a sequestration. And there was a big talk about that initially a few years ago. And there was we had a pilot program. Is that correct? I mean, was it?
Yeah, I think we started using sequestration back in 2013. That's when we started to get some additional tools. That and Cal revocation, both of those have been really.
That initial pilot program was pretty successful.
Yeah.
Would you say
It was hugely successful.
I think you took like 50. I mean, and I'm just recanting off of memory. I think we used like 50,000 properties as a. I mean, there was a
yeah, I'm forgetting what was in the pilot project, but as was noted earlier, sequestration's bringing in about $1.5 million a month. I think collections to date since that program started are over $70 million. So that's
over the 5 years. That
Yep.
would be if you're doing one. I mean, so I mean that's a. It's not chump change.
It's a game changer. Yeah, that and Cal revocation were game changers.
And it's a new tool. I mean, the state passed a bill, Act 135, which is similar, right? Because that's sends a property through the courts under receivership, which would now be the city would act as the managing agent for that property in collection of their rent. Is that correct?
Yes.
And those tenants would be offered the same services and opportunities for any other kind of services that the city has to offer regardless. So none of that changes.
That's right.
This is more to the irresponsible and flagrant delinquent owner of the property in its failure to pay taxes.
That's right. And they're income producing properties. So
they're
essentially
income-producing
we can take the income, use it to pay the taxes, and then turn it back, the receivership back to the owner after after the
That's
taxes
great.
have been paid.
And I think, and I just want to be clear, we want the city to know that we're going after the bad actors.
We
That
are.
people who are flagrantly and willfully not paying their taxes while collecting rent or while making an investment, whether it's, commercial property or investment property in residential, that we're going after them. And we're going after them with newly created tools and tools that have become available either through a pilot program or through best practices. Is that correct?
That's right.
And one of the nice notes for the sequestration program is now being enhanced this year because for the first time with the new data warehouse in revenue, we're able to match rental licenses to properties. When we first started sequestration, we were basically just throwing stuff out and seeing what was an income-producing property. Now we can know who has a rental license and target those properties. We also are expecting to start to get lists from L&I, which has been going after people who don't get rental licenses and finding them, and then they're going to tell us this person is renting on the sly, and we'll put that property into sequestration if it's delinquent.
And Ms. Beckley, I mean, as you recall, and we've been working with your office, I'm going to speak for the 6th Councilmatic District. Right? We are tired of people who are collecting rent and not being registered with the city of Philadelphia. When you talk about an underground economy, all right, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about fairness and having, treating even the tenants with respect, all right? That's called fairness. And if somebody is skirting, a housing rental license, right, they're skirting a lot of other things, all right? And that's not paying their taxes. That's not, making sure that their property is maintained and they become a blighted nuisance property in our neighborhood, which then destroys the quality of life of a block, which then, destroys the quality of life of the neighborhood, which devalues the property value in our neighborhoods. That's how it works. And we can quantify this, all right? And we have quantified this with delinquent tax deadbeats, all right, who willfully are breaking the law and collecting rent and or other products and businesses if they're commercial, and property maintenance violations and not having any housing inspection violations. And I can't emphasize enough that decreases the values. And I did the data, all right, by 20% in the neighborhood, and that's what makes neighborhoods, all right, in part, all right, decrease its value, invites crime, gives people the wrong message. That it's okay to do illegal things in this neighborhood because look at it, all right? Why? Why? Because we allowed it. So I'm glad that we're really cracking down and not allowing it. And we're not going to allow it in the 6th District, and I don't think any other council member wants it happen in our thing in their neighborhoods when we're trying to figure out the best way to improve our collection rates just on real property, and not including any other delinquent taxes or business taxes, just real estate taxes.
But I think the cooperation, certainly we applaud the support of your office and city council and the communication within city government. We talked a little bit about how we're talking to L&I and other departments. We're working with other departments. We have new tools like the data warehouse, and we have
I know
new
you are, and
collection
I'm a
tools.
big fan of data warehouse, right? That's a profile of an address, all right? What's going on with this address right here? All right, now, it took a long time to get to where we are, all right, but we are where we are now, and we need to utilize the heck out of it, all right, to ensure, all right, this mass hysteria, that some of the community members and the city may be facing when, every time we turn around, we're having a conversation about taxes, all right? Well, we're doing something about it, and we have the data to do so. I got 2 last questions, and I'll be real quick. So you've already stated that we're using new tools. You're always open for sharpening up our toolbox. Sequestration, all right, was a new tool. It works. It's effective. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to ramp up on it. What about tax security, securitization, tax liens? All right, that is another toolbox. So if we have through sequestration a 75% rate of return, all right, when people, starting to pay their taxes, because more notifications, right? And notifications in a different way with different language, all right, than you normally have. Can you, and sheriff's sale, what is our sheriff's sale, that to your knowledge, when things are, properties are taken to sheriff's sale? What's the compliance rate on that?
Do we have the?
It's
Yeah,
high,
so I
right?
could,
We have the numbers. I think it's interesting to watch, if we request 12,000 ticks and essentially set up 12,000 accounts for sheriff's sale, the melt, and it really comes from the noticings, to the time of sheriff's sale, that's down to about 4,000 accounts. So 8,000 accounts will just rectify through the noticing.
Exactly.
So to your point, the power of notification.
The power and tools of notification in different ways effectively, all right, for people who are delinquent to get in compliance or to take advantage of the programs that we're actually promoting with the city along with those notices. So
And securitization.
So 75% high on sheriff's sale and tax lien securitization is 85%. Why are we not doing tax lien securitization with the city of Philadelphia when we have 67,000 tax delinquencies that are out there, and only how many are non-owner occupied?
about 50,000 of those.
Yeah, about, what do we have, about 16,000 are owner occupied,
So
21%.
only 16,000 are owner occupied. That
Yeah.
means 51,000 properties are non-owner occupied, all right? And you have attorney fees, right, that are, more than less than half. I mean, it's in line with sequestration, right? 6% or 6.6%, all right, for sequestration. I don't know why we're not using those tools.
So securitization is certainly a tool that we want to look at, and we want to have the power to do. And,
Well, why don't we
Councilman.
why don't we just do it? What is to stop us from just?
Well, to bring in a manager to do securitization is a multi-year contract, and we need council approval to
Well,
do that.
I'm going to urge, right, and ask my colleagues in the city, in this body, all right, to take a look at the policy, all right? If, 75%, 85%, 90%, these are all good programs effectively, all right, going after our tax delinquencies that are out there when it comes to real property. Not included any other, delinquency taxes, because we can add that all to the pack in a time when we desperately need so. Our schools are in disrepair, our public properties and our rec centers are in disrepair. So we're trying to do something. We're really trying to present good ideas. And I know we've been working with you, but I had just urged this body to consider it publicly, at a hearing and see where we go. But there's no reason why not to, if there's protections for people and social service, wraparound services that we already have in place, right, where nobody will be displaced. You've already proven that with sequestration.
Yeah,
So,
no owner-occupied properties would be included.
no owner occupied. Thank you so much. All right,
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Councilman. Just to follow up real quickly on that. On that issue, if you strip out the owner-occupied properties, of that's what's remaining. A lot of them have been on the books for a while. I guess what I'm getting at is how much is that is really collectible in your opinion?
158 million is our active principal balance. So that's newer than 10 years. That's our most collectible.
So that 10 years is
Then another 40 million in principal, approximately 40 million in principal, that's older, a little more challenging to collect. But as has been stated, this is real estate taxes, and there's, first priority liens on all of these properties. And I've been around long enough to have seen times where we were asked, why aren't you writing off certain delinquencies
right.
20 years ago? And now those are really valuable properties, and that money's rolling in as those properties sell.
Okay. All right, thank you. Councilwoman Gim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I had a couple questions about the school district and the city's distribution of the millage tax. Could you just clarify for me what is the school district portion and what is the actual city portion? I understand the distribution is 55-45, but could you give me the numbers?
Oh, We have the numbers
Sorry, I
in front
didn't
of us,
mean
we should.
I
I
surprised
can
you.
Google it, hold on.
Great. And one of the questions I also had is, for each incremental change in the transition, how much money are we roughly talking about? So I understand about the percentage ratio difference, but how does that translate into actual millage rates, and what amount of money would we be talking about? Does that make sense? So for example, if you were to say the millage rate was 1.4, right? And then it's 0.77 school district, 0.63 to the city if it's a 55-45 distribution. To move the school district to like a 56, 44, 58, 42, and 60, 40, what are we looking at in terms of amounts of money
So
per
we're-
incremental change?
What we could do is provide for you like a little calculator that would let you toggle that if you moved it to, instead of 55-45, if you kept the total rate constant, what would those rates have to be? We're able to provide that, and I think I'm about to be able to provide you with the numbers for the current millage rates, except for I scrolled. Nope, okay, so the total is 1.3998, and we will get back to you with how that is divided between the school and the city portion. Wait, I'm just bad at cell
So
phones.
if it's like a 55-45, is it literally 0.77 goes to the school district and 0.63 goes to the city?
Oh, okay, yes. So it is 0.6317 goes to the city.
Right.
0.7681 goes to the school district for a grand total of 1.3998.
Yeah. And as I said, as you move percentage-wise up between the two numbers, if it were to stay steady, what amount of money are we talking about in terms of each percentage transfer? Does that make sense? So like right now,
sorry.
this is the 0.7681 for the school district of Philadelphia is determined by a 55-45 split between the school district and the city. Is that right?
So do you want to give the legal answer of how the rates are?
Well, yeah, I mean, legally, there are two separate taxes, and they're
Yes.
imposed separately. So that it isn't a question of imposing this and then splitting it up. It's however you raise the proportional rates, because you pass each tax in a separate ordinance.
And it's my understanding that the proposal for raising taxes is to maintain the 55-45 split.
I think we'll probably need to defer to budget and finance at the tax bill hearings later today, because I think they'll have a better handle on that.
Right. And one option is solely to look at the school
is?
district portion.
It's not. Hang on one sec.
Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon. Now, the proposal is to raise the school district portion, and that will then change the percent. So then there'd be a higher percent that was on the school district side than on.
And do you know what
I think
that will end up
gets
at?
up to about 58,
58%.
I think. I'll have that for you this afternoon, but I think that's.
So it isn't an even distribution between the city and the school district?
increase is solely for the school district.
End of it.
Yes.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
And I guess my only other follow-up, Rob, is that if that transfer, if there's a city transfer, what incrementally does that begin to look like? Or can I just figure that out by doing the math? on the
So you mean if we just shifted the millage?
Shifted.
Actually, one of the questions that we got, I think actually from Councilwoman Sanchez, was about what each
Millage point.
20 million is worth.
20 million.
And I think that went over yesterday, so you should have that in writing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want a few follow-up comments and maybe a question. But I wanted to clarify that taxes are a first lien on real estate. They come before any other debt, including mortgages, lenders, et cetera. So whether it's 10 years or 20 years, we will get paid, and this is why this piece is important. On the books today, I just got the information from revenue, I think it's from your records. We have 90,000 delinquent properties in total. We have 461 million of outstanding and market value of $9 billion. My point is that the lien-to-value ratio of the total portfolio is closer to 5%. 5%. On the owner-occupied, when you take them out, there's still about $215 million of non-owner occupied delinquency. It's $215 million against $5.7 billion of real estate. These are people who don't use this as their home. Their real estate's worth $5.7 billion, and they owe us $215 million, and their loan to value is 4%. We will get paid on a lot of that. A lot of it. 4%. The national average is, if you get above 40 or 50%, you're not going to get paid. We are at 4%. We're going to get paid. So I just want to put those statistics out there. I really don't have any other questions for you, though. But thank you, and I want to just reiterate what my colleagues have said. Commissioner, you and your department doing a very good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. And I said this after Councilman Don, because he accuses me of saying it every time before him, that we are running late. So if we could make this the last round, that would be good, because the BRT's been waiting a long time, and then we got more this afternoon. Thank you. Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Quickly, I know that we've been talking about, and Rob had committed to this. What is going to be our outreach effort for the 28% unenrollment for Homestead? And then how are we going to tie that into TAP? And will council have a role in that moving forward, similar to what we did with the ABI campaign?
I'd say absolutely. We have an outreach plan that we're putting together that will engage council in. We know that actually you're some of our best referrals when it comes to that. One of the things that we've done is continue to upgrade the online portions, and recently we did training for council constituent staffers around some of our programs, and we continue to put videos of those trainings for council staffers up online so that your folks can really help us out. There's a number of things that we can utilize, getting stuffers into utility bills with PGW, with WRB on the tax side, and there's been a really robust plan on the water side. I don't know if you, Michelle, want to mention anything, but if you don't want to, I can keep going.
Michelle Bethel, Deputy Revenue Commissioner. So to piggyback off of what Marissa said, so the Water Department has taken a very robust approach with outreach for TAP. So of course, partnering with yourself and other councilmatic districts, and with our other partners, CLS, the neighborhood community centers, USEF. That's the primary way that we're doing outreach. In addition to, we had things on SEPTA, we had newspaper ads, and
Last time, and this is where I'm getting to, last time we partnered with some of our community stakeholders, and we actually hired boots on the ground, people to do door-to-door. I was in the Northeast yesterday, where, as you know, one of my highest water delinquencies, and one of the things that we just need to do door-to-door. I mean, we really need to go door-to-door and explain to people. They're not reading the circulars, they're not reading, so are we going to be able to have the ability to do that? I thought that was the most effective when we had some of our community stakeholders hiring people to do, similar to what we've done with mortgage foreclosure. We did a housing summit a couple of weeks ago with our housing providers, and obviously the Water Department was there. Other than boots on the ground, I don't know what else is going to work.
We can absolutely look at that. As you know, we also have a very robust outreach program around the federal earned income tax credit, and that this past tax season, we did have a boots on the ground strategy where we're either going door to door, or in some instances, we're just hitting commercial corridors, or we're at county assistance offices, daycare centers, other places. We similarly actually had a boots on the ground effort to ramp up the Philadelphia beverage tax. And so that has been something that's been really effective. So we can take that back and look at how we can reapply that to the homestead and to the other
I'd like
assistance.
to see how effective our boots on the ground last time was, and just have a budget for it, and let's just do it. I just don't want to continue to wait as I watch the water delinquencies, because we have the conversation, continue to creep up, particularly in my only middle income neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Council.
Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Councilman. And I'll be quick. A couple things I didn't get a chance to go over in our first round. One, and I think it's all important, and I know, I mean, I do share some of the councilwoman's concerns with boots on the ground. I mean, sometimes, you know, mail just unfortunately doesn't work, and it comes down to, you know, not necessarily trusting people that's coming to your door, but you have a better connect rate when it comes to some of the things we're trying to accomplish. So we should consider that. Two things. We discussed service issues, and when I say service issues, I mean serving, right, and connecting, where we're using these skip tracer tools and some others, and everything. So how are we with service issues legally when it comes to, do we know what that rate is of connection would be?
I can
From
certainly
the law
look.
department? So when we use some of these other tools, or we have to, you know, when you go to sequestration or sheriff's department, or if, you know, this body, you know, wants to enter into, which I implore that they consider a tax lien securitization for non-occupied residents, we would need a court order. What is the service rate? Or how much of an issue is that going to be with non-service?
We can look into getting you the exact figures. It's a little bit like a musical composition. You're looking to, as you said, use many approaches. We use skip tracing. I mean, part of the beauty of foreclosure, when we do get to that, is that we don't have to have effective personal service to be able to go forward with the foreclosure action. But much better than serving people when they have debt is preventing them from getting into debt. And I want to take this opportunity, if you'll give me just a minute, to applaud the Revenue Commissioner, because he was really the person who put together the current commercial activity license revocation program. And better than chasing people after they're in debt is not letting them get there. That program shuts businesses if they're not current. When Garces Restaurant went into bankruptcy last week, they did not owe any back liquor tax. And that's totally to the credit of the Revenue Commissioner and Marco Muniz, who runs the Cal revocation program, because if somebody with a liquor license falls behind on their liquor, they're there. They give them the opportunity. They send them a letter, 10 days. They send them another letter, 2 days. After 2 days, they're there with the police. They shut the door. The business is closed until they come current. It's a fantastic program, and it's so much better than trying to chase people after they owe you money. Just don't let them get into debt. Don't let them get in the hole in the first place.
And you know, we certainly don't want to, you know, have to get to, we have it. By the time you find out that there's a service problem or issue, it's kind of late, right? Then we become first priority, which we're trying to avoid. We want people to get on the rolls, enter into agreements, you know, stay, you know, working as small businesses, stay staying in the city of Philadelphia, take advantage of our program. So, all right, so service is a little bit, but I do think that, you know, staying on top of, you know, when you talk about license revocation, look, if somebody isn't paying their tax and they're delinquent and they're willfully just disregarding everything, and we know of a known address, and, you know, they're pulling permits, or they're, you know, acting under a particular license, no matter what the license is, liquor or not, well, then the threat of pulling it is, I mean, that's their livelihood. So that really kind of shakes them up, and it gets them in line. And nobody wants to take anybody's property, right? And nobody wants their property taken. I mean, that's real property rights. It goes back, you know, since, you know, I mean, I guess the railroads built in America, you know what I mean? But,
And it's
you know,
important to note
nobody wants
with
that.
all of these tools, even with the closure of the businesses, that the intent there is not really to put anybody out of business. But
Absolutely not.
what generally happens is within 24 hours, the taxpayers come in, entered into an agreement, they're back, they're compliant, and that's why we need tools like foreclosure, Cal revocation. I mean, certainly they seem like harsh tools, but sometimes that's what it takes just to move a person into compliance, and then they avoid that ultimate result.
Just, right. Last, out-of-town investors, property owners. they are the bane of our existence here when it comes to, complaints in our neighborhoods and complaints from, council members in this body. We've authorized the tools, which I think we already had anyway, all right, but we took it a step further. So the state authorized municipalities to go outside the county and enter into judgment or, ask for our filing in other counties. And we did so here as a city council. Do we have a grasp on how many out-of-town landlords that are delinquent and what the value is of that delinquencies, in addition to what steps have we taken as far as action in ratio to the amount of individuals? Because now we can lien their properties, their other property, their other assets, in addition to going after them in their county in which they reside. We can lien their assets.
That's right. So 5% of the delinquents are out-of-state residents, and that totals $7.8 million of principal.
What is that with fines and penalties?
I don't have that in front of me, I just have the
Okay.
principal amount.
All right.
But 6% are out of Philadelphia within Pennsylvania, and that's 9.7 million. And we've used that new tool to place 983 liens on properties of these out of Philadelphia landlords. And what we do is we essentially transfer that judgment outside. So they go to sell their property, they go to sell any of their properties, or if they try to sell that out of city property, or refinance that property, and that lien will show up and will have to be resolved before they can do that. So that's a really powerful tool. We don't have collection numbers on that. It's relatively new, but we've got those almost 1,000 liens out there, and they will start to pay dividends, and that's an important message to send to people. We're also tweaking it a little bit. We started that as a pilot project. What we were doing was we were transferring the liens without giving kind of forewarning that we were doing that. Now we're going to send a notice first that says this is what we're about to do unless you pay, and we're going to measure what kind of response that yields.
Okay, I'll call you offline and see if I can get, better numbers of what 5% represents and what the total
Yeah,
fines
we can
and
definitely
penalties
get that for you.
and all that, and out of state, and where they seem to be. If you have 9% in the, or 6% in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and then 5% seems to be outside of Pennsylvania.
total of
probably,
11
probably like
11%.
Florida or something like that. I think they kind of clustered, but we'll talk offline and we'll get that and we'll have another conversation.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm done. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
All right, Councilman Blackwell hasn't had a chance yet, then Councilman Dom, and then if we could move on, that would be great, because we're really behind.
Thank you. I have
Councilwoman.
an easy question that someone just asked me. They talked about the transfer tax and how that has gone up, and if there is a way that people can pay, in part, get into payment agreements, because it will help them to catch up and then be able to pay their taxes off. Do we have some system where people can make an agreement on that?
On real estate transfer tax?
Yes.
Yeah, that can be done with the law department. We do make agreements occasionally on those.
Through the law department?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman, thank you very much. Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple follow-up questions. I just want to mention that there are, even though we're excluding from the legislation I introduced, there are owner-occupants in this city who are delinquent, who can afford to pay and choose not to pay. And I know they're in Center City, they're in the neighborhoods, I see the numbers. So there are people out there who have $500,000, $750,000, $1 million homes that aren't paying their taxes, just to put that out there. I wanted to switch over to the water department for a moment. And I know that in prior hearings here this year, it was mentioned that there's $360 million in water receivables, and it was clarified that about $261 million are actually delinquent, okay? And of that amount, 61 million is for non-residential properties, and 200 million is for residential properties. Do we have any program for the 61 million that it's in non-residential properties to collect those delinquent water and sewer bills?
Yes. For commercial,
Yes.
I'm sorry, say the question one more time, I'm sorry.
The question is, there's, of the total amount receivable is
Yes.
360 million, delinquent is 261 million,
Right.
and of the delinquent, about 200 is for residential properties. And by the way, in this category, it's explained to me that there is owner-occupied and investor, but the programs for water and sewer are available to all residential properties.
Correct.
So my question is, on the commercial properties, the delinquency is about 61 million. My question is, what is the program we're using to try to collect that 61 million?
Well, the first one option for that, of course, is always shut off, just stop service. But what we are very excited about is we are getting closer and closer. We anticipate right now it will begin in September to being able to do full-scale foreclosure for water debt. State law, while water is subordinate to real estate, it is also a super priority lien. For example, it will supersede a pre-existing mortgage. And we will be able to refer commercial accounts out to outside counsel, as well as we have been doing batches of large delinquencies in-house in the law department, but we'll also be able to use outside counsel starting in September. We've just been waiting for the internal computer programming to allow those accounts to be smoothly sent out.
So in the lien priority, real estate taxes come first, water and sewer come second?
Right.
Okay. So that means there is also potential here that if we could ever get the legislation passed that I've introduced, that we could also take the 61 million and put it into that grouping of these commercial delinquent utility liens, basically.
Yes, and you can do a unified foreclosure action for real estate and water in the same court case,
Okay.
Which is part of what we will be looking to do with outside counsel.
That's great. Keep up the good work. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you, Councilman. Well, thank you all very much for spending your whole morning and part of the afternoon with us. We appreciate that. So again, thanks for all the work you're doing in your department. Our next, you want to take a quick one? You sure? Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. We're going to have the Board of Revision of Taxes, then we're going to take a break right after that. So if I could ask people who are leaving, please leave quietly so we can move quickly on, please. No, ma'am, please. Good afternoon, Mr. Gahn. Okay. We have your written testimony, so anything quick you'd like to say, and then,
I'll make one brief statement.
thank you. Please identify yourself. And then proceed.
Carla Pagan, Executive Director, Board of Revision of Taxes.
Thank you.
The chairman was upset that he couldn't be here today, so he did ask me to read a statement to you all. He says, Chairman Eugene Mayer, Judge, and Chairman of the Board of Revision of Taxes, the BRT has about 50 very high-volume appeals scheduled this morning at 10 a.m. The attendance of the appeals procedures precludes his appearance here at City Council testimony today. The BRT has instituted procedures to expedite the 6,300 plus appeals scheduled for tax year 2018. Among those procedures is a very stringent non-continuance policy. So the appeals, which will be prosecuted by the School District of Philadelphia today, must go forward. He would like to report that the BRT has completed more than 3,000 appeals for tax year 2018 and will again confirm that all 2018 appeals will be heard and decided by December 31st. And it's available if you have questions for him at a later date.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me ask quickly, I know your written testimony, you talk about the new CAMA system, which we seem to be hearing about for years here.
Yes.
That they say is coming next year, I believe.
Yes.
And you say it'll dramatically reduce the amount of processing. Could you explain why that would make that kind of difference? And I guess on the other side, what are we losing time-wise by not having it? Because it seemed like we kept getting promised that for a few years. That's not your fault, I'm just saying,
Sure. Well, when people ask us to do certain things, I kind of describe our systems post the typewriter before Windows almost. So right now, there's a lot of manual manipulation, and you take 10 steps to share information or process a document that should normally require 1 or 2 steps. So that new Canvas system will have a piece that covers an appeals module, so it will help us quickly receive appeals and then share those appeal filings with our department, with also the assessors at the OPA. And then it allows us to keep status updates with the property owners regarding their appeal applications, and also easily communicate their hearing information and also their decision information.
So any rough idea when you say cut it down percentage-wise, any guesstimate on that, would you say?
We operate at very minimal staff levels now.
Okay.
We have personnel that we absolutely need. So it probably won't eliminate additional people, but the jobs and tasks that we have become more efficient.
Okay. Now, I'm just talking about time-wise. I'm not looking to lose people for you.
So it saves operations time-wise. So are you thinking time-wise as in the hearing schedule? Or?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, yeah. Where the constituents say, why is it taking so long to, get my hearing?
So it probably won't reduce the time in a hearing, because most people that are waiting for hearings actually want to come in before the board and put testimony on.
Okay. So this is getting the information together before the hearing, basically. is what you're
Correct.
saying. Okay,
Correct.
gotcha. One other quick thing.
Sure.
I know oftentimes when people appeal, they're saying, my property's not worth 400, it's only worth 300 or whatever. Is it fair to say the best thing that they should come in is an appraisal? Is that the most effective argument that they can make?
Well, for residential property owners under $1 million, they don't have to go out and pay for an appraisal report.
Yeah.
If they don't have a local real estate office they're in contact with, the easiest, if they have internet access, they can go into Trulia or Zillow or Realtor.com and find other properties in their neighborhood that are similar to theirs and look at those sales numbers. So you want the city's market value should be close to what your house would sell for. So they could find comparable sales at no cost to them.
They can do comps? Okay.
Correct.
Because I know a lot of times I'm told the best thing that could come in, I know appraisals cost money, $600-700, which is people trying to save money, but I've been told that's the most effective way to do it.
For properties over $500,000, but it's not a board requirement.
No, I know it's not a requirement. I'm just saying what is the best sort of argument you can make. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilwoman Gim.
Yes, thank you very much, Councilman. Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So could you tell me what the BRT's current schedule is for hearings?
Sure. You want the calendar or appeal volume? Right. So right now they're actually in hearings. We have 3 oral hearings a week. That's Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. On Wednesday, the board reviews all of those petitions that are considered non-oral or administrative hearings. And then we also read cases into the record on Wednesdays. And then Friday is a prep day. So 3 oral days a week, 1 non-oral administrative day a week.
Isn't that 2 administrative days a week? So if you have 3 hearing days, wouldn't that actually be 2 administrative days?
So Friday, I don't really classify as administrative, only because they can prep either in the office or outside of the office. So technically, yes, Friday is an administrative day, but the prep at work is not required to be done in the office.
And for clarity, how much are the board positions paid?
The chairman makes $75,000 a year, the secretary $72,500, and the other board members $70,000 a year.
And I think City Council increased the salaries in part to ensure that we could meet some of our deadlines for AVI, is that correct?
I know it's called an increase. When the board had salary issues before, it was a reinstatement of their existing salary. So the salaries I quoted had been the salaries for at least more than a decade. At one point, they were taken away, so it was a reinstatement of salaries rather than an increase.
Uh-huh, okay. So one of the questions that I had was, as you know, there was a lot of struggle during the 2014 AVI process when the appeals were significantly delayed. There were lots of questions that were had about the BRT schedule, and in part, it had a lot to do with the fact that as a result of the significant delays, the School District of Philadelphia was significantly off the mark in terms of its budget projections and estimates. I think when we came in last time, one of the questions that I had asked about whether it was possible to move to 4 hearings a week, given the fact that we have another significant situation around assessments, people need and deserve to have their hearings presented before them as quickly as possible. And I'm wondering what you think the BRT's capacity is to handle what I would expect to be an enormous round of appeals processes coming through.
So on average annually, we receive, on a regular year or an average year, we receive 5,000 to 8,000 appeals. There's no reason that in a calendar year, January through December, the board can't hear and render decisions on all those appeals. The year you're speaking about AVI, there were 24,000 appeals filed in one year. So that was the main reason that appeal volume took so long to get through. But so for example—
What was your schedule for meeting during the AVI period? I think when we discussed, there was lots of questions about how frequently the BRT was meeting, particularly during the summer.
Yeah, so during the AVI appeal year, we ended up having to split the board into 2 quorums, and we actually had AM sessions and AM sessions and afternoon sessions 3 days a week, and I think non-oral sessions 2 days a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know that that was one of the outstanding concerns. I would anticipate that given the number of people who are going to be reassessed across the city, that the 24,000 appeals that we saw in 2014 wouldn't necessarily be completely off the mark in this particular case. So how does the BRT intend to alter its schedule to meet the demand that is likely to come through in 2018?
So we don't expect 24,000 appeals. So during AVI, 560,000 notices went out, and over 400,000 residents got changed in value. So we're estimating maybe 6,000 to 8,000 for tax year 2019. And again, going off of, we use OPA's numbers and estimates kind of project our business, but although the assessment office is putting out a large volume of appeals, or excuse me, assessment changes, there is a significant portion that it will have decreases. So we don't think it would impact the appeal filing volume like it did for tax year 2014.
And should there be a change in that, should more appeals be filed, is the BRT planning to rearrange its hearing schedule to meet that kind of demand?
Absolutely, and it seems it worked best when you have a large volume of residential cases to split the board and do an AM and a PM session, so then you're doubling your oral hearings in one work week.
Mm-hmm. And could you not, I know that one of the questions that came up was about your intention to meet the 2018 goal of conclusion or resolution of all the appeals, but arguably couldn't you do the splitting up of the AM and PM now and just guarantee that you'll meet the goals as opposed to project and hope that you'll meet those goals?
So this is we're guaranteeing for 2018. Absolutely, it's a guarantee. For most of this appeal year, the split hearing won't work only because typically we get about 30% commercial cases and 70% residential. And for tax year 2018, it was the exact opposite. So the majority of our cases are for commercial appeals, and that hearing testimony takes twice, sometimes 4 times as long as a residential appeal hearing. So we have more cases held during a day, but the hearings tend to go much longer.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think I mentioned this last year, but again, you know, I recognize that this is, you know, a significant issue, but many of our residents rely very heavily on the appeals process, as do our city and state school district government entities. Budgets are relying on it. School children are relying on the effective resolution of appeals, and I would urge you again to see what you can do, because there are 5 days in a week. Because currently the hearings are scheduled 3. I understand that there needs to be administrative prep 2 days a week. For administrative prep seems like a lot, especially when so much is hanging in the balance. And, you know, I think it's really clear that the city of Philadelphia put in an effort to make sure that the commissioners were paid an appropriate amount, that they were paid equally, so that commissioners did not get paid unfairly during any kind of time period. But in return, my hope would be that there would be the confidence that the commissioners would meet 4 to 5 days a week, that you would try to up your hearing schedules significantly in order to ensure that all of us on city council have the confidence that the resolutions to the appeals process, and that our own citizenry can be sure that there can be a rapid resolution. Even if the resolution may or may not be the outcome that people want, they need resolution quickly. We can't see what happened with the ABI process in 2014 happen again.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions.
Sure.
Could you walk me through the process of how somebody goes to file an appeal and the processes that we take on our end?
Sure. So the appeal filing deadline's first Monday of October. So for 2019 assessments, it'll be October 1st of 2018. They can either file by coming into our office. The form is also on our website. They can complete the fillable PDF and email that form to us, or they can mail a form in. So once we receive that form, it goes through a data entry process in our office, and it's also scanned, so it's electronically shared with the assessor's office. And then once all the appeals are in our system, scheduling begins for them. Hearing notices go out. And then probably 2 weeks to 30 days after any given hearing, they receive a decision letter. If any one person's appeal gets reduced, we send that revised lower number to the assessment office, and then a cert goes to revenue to change their tax bill. And then if appeal is denied, the bill stays the same.
And then if I were to file an appeal today, what's the anticipated time frame when I might be in front of the board appealing my taxes?
So it would depend. So for tax year 2018, again, it's a very heavy commercial hearing year. So we made the attempt to schedule a lot of homeowners first to get their appeals in and heard by March 31st. So if they did get reduced, they could pay their lower tax bill. We will, though, have 2,000 appeal hearings through the fall of this year. So a couple unique things. A lot of cases are in the 10 million plus mark that we've kind of sprinkled out throughout this calendar year, and then there are cases that are well over 50 million. And so they'll have hearings throughout the calendar year. And so, for example, also a lot of attorneys have filed appeals this year rather than property owners. So we might have one law office that has filed 100 to 300 appeals. So in that kind of case, we've actually taken that law officer, 1 or 2 lawyers, and given them a schedule from January 2018 through December, so they have their whole hearing schedule for the year in front of them, so they can plan accordingly.
Is the property owner required to pay the increased amount while they're going through the hearing?
Yes, this year they have been.
And if they determine that the amount is incorrect, is that check then returned to the property owner, or is it applied against future obligations?
They can either apply for a refund, and that check is returned to them, or if they do nothing, they'll have a credit on their 2019 bill.
Right, but we don't pay any interest on the money that we receive from them, right?
I don't know, actually.
Do we pay an interest rate on, if we have to return $10,000 to somebody and we've held it for a year, do we pay any interest on the money, or we just use it as an interest-free loan?
I'm not sure about that, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me just, from what I'm looking at the numbers, I just want to read this into the record to make sure I understand what's going on with the assessments. The assessment numbers total about 26% of the properties in Philadelphia on the most recent assessment went down in value, and 2% stayed the same. 30% increased between 1 and 10%, and 42% increased 10, 15, 20, and higher percent. And you think there's only going to be 6,000 to 8,000 appeals from that information?
We're anticipating under 10,000.
Okay.
We've actually overestimated these past few years, so.
I mean, 10,000 would be great because really, when you look at the whole portfolio, it's less than 2%.
Right. And a part of our appeal numbers being smaller than usual is that also with AVI, the OPA implemented that first level review process. So before, if we took the entire burden of the appeal filing, now part of that burden is shared with the assessment office.
And so if I file for an appeal, is there a first review process that can be expedited where you meet with 2 or 3 people to see if you can resolve the question of, of the value of the property? Does that happen?
Yes, but it's usually without a meeting. So maybe you might file, you don't hear anything, but you get a receipt letter, and then you may get a decision a month to 3 months later.
So I just want to throw out this idea for you to think about. Instead of having people wait 6 months or a year or longer to come in front of the board, would it make sense to have 2 or 3 people with the assessor meet with the person whose taxes were raised in a meeting and see if that can be resolved rather than going through the whole process?
I think the assessment office tries to do that, but again, it depends how many informal appeals they get and what they're doing in that assessment
I know,
calendar
but the
during that time.
assessor's doing it one-on-one with the taxpayer.
Correct.
What
Or
I'm
they're
talking
making
about
inspections.
Instead of going from one-on-one to now we have a whole board of, how many people on the board? 7?
7.
Is there an intermediary step where you can't resolve with the assessor, but you bring in 2 other people with the assessor and the taxpayer to try to get it resolved?
We've done that one time, and that's during AVI, for those, property owners that were willing, and we had masters come in to help those people that just wanted to speak before, 1 or 2 board members. So
Okay.
yes, we did that once before. And if we do get 20,000 appeals, that will be another step we'll have to take for 2019.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
Thank you very much, Council President. Just for clarity, can you tell me usually when you say that what are the hours that the BRT usually does hearings from?
So for the last 2 tax years, hearings have started at 10 a.m.
And conclude when usually?
So we have hearings that last 15 minutes and 5 hours. It all depends on how many of the cases get settled before the hearing.
So there's not a conclusion time, you just schedule a certain number of hearings per day?
There's not. So for example, today we had 50 to 75 school district appeals scheduled. And so maybe of those 60 cases, I think 15 of those were settled before hearings started today. So we anticipate some settlements. So that may cut a half an hour off the hearing time. But then sometimes you may anticipate 25% of the cases being settled, and they don't, and hearings go well into the afternoon. So it really depends on the caseload and what documents the property owners file with their appeal, and if they can reach a settlement with the assessment office.
And do you require all 7 commissioners to be in the hearing to listen to all the cases all at once?
We don't. So state law says a quorum is 4 board members. So just like in AVI, if we have a huge appeal volume, we'll split the board and do 2 panels of 4 board members.
Okay. And so then, do you normally seek to schedule 50 to 75 hearings a day? Is that your schedule?
Depending on what's on the docket for the day. So for example, maybe on condo hearing days, we can bring in 4 condo buildings and get through 800 appeals in one day. Commercial cases that are 5 million to 50 million, we may schedule 30 to 50 in a day. And then residential neighborhoods where the property values are 250 to 700,000, maybe 50 to 70 cases a day.
And do you schedule those based on the amount of time they're expected to take up during the day? So there's not like a set amount of time that
Correct.
you just
It's
start at
all
10 a.m. and
what we anticipate, right.
whenever you conclude, is that the end?
Correct. Well, it's not when we conclude, it's when the caseload is done. So we might schedule 50 people for 10 a.m. and everyone walks in the door at 10 a.m. And they're scheduled in a sequence order. So one person may be in and out in 15 minutes, and then the person at the end of the hearing day may be out in 2 or 3 hours. Yeah.
But you could conclude at 2 p.m., for example, like your schedule could be done, if you move rapidly through it, you could be
If the
done
caseload is
by
done,
2
yes,
p.m.
the schedule could conclude, yeah.
And then the rest of the time is for administrative time?
Well, so it depends on what the board has scheduled for the next 2 hearing dates. So we'll schedule, so you try to schedule residential appeals intertwined with commercial appeals, because commercial cases require more extensive prep time. If you're reviewing a case where they're arguing over $50 million versus $5,000, the prep time does become extensive. So it depends what the board has on their docket for the following 2 hearing dates.
Okay. All right, thank you for clarifying that schedule. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes our testimony for today. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Ms. Pagan. Yeah, I forgot I was supposed to take a break. We're going to come back and do tax bills this afternoon. Mr. DeBoe. I'll take like a 45-minute break. So we'll be back at 1:45. Oh, great, thank you. I enjoy you. Good afternoon. I'm going to reconvene, and we will be hearing tax bills by the Finance Department. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, President Clark and member of the committee. I'm Rob Dubo, Finance Director of the City of Philadelphia, and I'm here to testify in support of bills number 108, 165, 66, 67, with proposed amendments, and 68, which form a substantial part of the administration's revised funding proposal for the district. They form a package that would provide financial stability to the district while also allowing it to continue making investments to build on recent successes. After receiving certified property assessments for FY2019, Mayor presented a revised funding package and will respectfully propose that the bills be amended to reflect the new proposal. Over the district's 5-year plan, the package is projected to generate about $770 million. That would eliminate the estimated $660 million deficit and leave the district with operational flexibility to keep school doors open without needing to cut programs, as well as the ability to make investments to build upon the improved educational outcomes the district's achieved over the last few years. Combined impact of the proposed funding will allow the district to maintain the programs it has restored over the last few years and make new investments. Those include expanding early literacy and providing more individualized student attention, putting greater resources in classrooms, increasing resources for 21st century high schools and CTE programs. The proposed funding package includes several items, and we did that to ensure no single item was too large. Package includes $20 million increase in the city's general fund contribution. We wanted to look to our own budget first before looking to any taxing options. Package also includes an increase in the school district portion of the property tax, a decrease in the wage tax rate, but at a slower rate than projected in last year's plan, and an increase in the transfer tax, which would be used to reimburse the school district for the cost of increasing the homestead exemption, which will help offset the impact of increasing property values. And then the bill lays out the specific rates of the proposals and for the transfer tax, property tax, and the wage tax. The impact of the property tax changes will vary depending on the value of a home, change in assessed value, and whether it has a homestead. And then we provide a couple of examples of how that works. And that concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I got a couple of quick questions. Kind of like a broken record in terms of us saying and most people believing that Harrisburg needs to meet its constitutionally mandated requirement to fund public schools, not only in Philly, but across the state. And in some instances, they've even acknowledged that they're not doing enough, you know, not normally in public, but when you have a candid conversation. Has the administrations, through its lobbyists or other methods, talked to the General Assembly or the governor about possible increases in their contribution to the public schools in the state?
Yeah, we've had continuing conversations with both the legislature and the governor's office. Our concern is that we don't want to have to kind of wait and take the risk that they won't do anything. So we think we really need to do something as we transition to local control locally.
Don't want to wait and take the risk.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So the district is projecting that without additional funding, it'll start to run deficits and then become back in the situation where that it was in a couple of years ago, where it's facing painful decisions about what cuts to make, and then we kind of lose the ground that it's been making up over the last couple of years. So, you know, without any guarantee or even kind of actual proposal on the table in Harrisburg, we thought it was important to put up some local funding. And should also add that this funding doesn't get the district to where it needs to be, it just gets it to financial stability.
When you say needs to be, what do you mean by that?
There's not adequate funding.
So what you're suggesting is that the 5-year proposal by the district, and I guess we'll see it tomorrow, we just got some documents, does not deal with the proposed deficit?
It eliminates the deficit and gives them a structural balance, and it allows them to make some investments. I think they'll say tomorrow that there's more they could do. And, you know, for example, they have a $4 billion need in their capital program. With this funding, they'll be able to expand their capital program, but it'll be more like $1 billion rather
So
than.
now we're going to pay for the capital program in the school district.
Well, what we provide, no, we're not paying. We're paying for the debt service on their borrowings to pay for their capital program.
I understand that.
And so they're borrowing. They're able to borrow more because of this funding.
Okay. So, given the fact that the state has been reluctant to fund, excuse me, basic needs for the school district, why do you think that they would step to the plate and fund something beyond what is needed as it relates to the operations and the quote-unquote adequate school district?
I'm not sure.
That thinking is like,
Right. I'm not sure.
I mean, why would they be so excited about helping the city of Philadelphia and giving us beyond what we actually need as opposed to?
I'm not sure that they ever would, which is one of the reasons I think that we need to do something locally.
No, what I'm saying, if there's a proposal on the table, we fund that proposal as it relates to the deficit. what makes you think that a entity, i.e. legislature, that was not willing to fund the required amount would now fund beyond that amount? I'm just,
Right. So I'm not
these
sure.
are people that never have not shown the willingness to fund the basic needs, so why would they fund
Right, and
something beyond the basic needs?
I'm not sure that they ever would even fund the basic needs, which is why I think we really need to do something locally.
Yeah, but that's not the question I asked you. I'm asking you, if they weren't going to fund the basic needs, why would you think that they would fund
So
the
I think,
additional need?
I mean, I think if they're going to, if they get to the point where they agree that they need to provide funding, it's probably going to be part of a statewide solution that won't be based on just Philadelphia locally, and I think that's how you kind of get to that next
So
level.
we don't
of
believe
funding.
the state's going to do anything next year? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know whether they'll do anything next year, and
Do you have information that supports that belief?
that they will or won't do anything. I know
That they won't?
I don't have
I mean,
any
your
information
perspective is that
they
we
will.
should just fund the 5-year deficit plan because the state's not going to do anything.
That I think that there's a substantial likelihood that they would not provide the amount of funding we need to have financial stability. Yes.
They have what?
To have financial stability for the district.
Okay, so could that have to do with the fact that we started out our budget process by basically saying we're going to take care of our own school district from a fiscal perspective? We didn't necessarily say it that way, but we implied.
I think the same thing has happened in years where we haven't done that, so I don't think it's directly related to what we said we're going to
Doesn't
do
matter
locally.
what we say?
I think that what will happen at the state will be driven by statewide issues more than what funding we put forward for
You
the
don't think
district.
that the statewide issue relates to public education?
I think it does, but what I'm saying is I don't think that that statewide decision will be based primarily on what Philadelphia does with its
I don't
funding.
think it will. I mean, I agree with you there. But I think that school districts across the state are underfunded significantly, and I think any solution and any additional revenue or change in formula will be based on statewide issues. I agree with you there.
Completely, yeah.
But it would be difficult to fund public education in the state and not put money in the city.
I agree.
So I'm just saying, if you're coming into this without any belief that the state's going to do anything, then why are we bothering to ask? I mean, that's your perspective.
No, I think what I said is...
That's not what I didn't get a sense of that when I talked.
No, I think what I said is that what they do won't be determined by what we do. It'll be part of a statewide solution.
Okay, so in terms of the people on a local level that are concerned about the level of commitment that we have made, $479 million a few years ago, significant increases in taxes, now an additional significant increase in assessment, then a request for an additional rate change for more money. You don't think what they believe matters? I mean, you're kind of suggesting that we're not going to ask the state because our people are going to eat the difference. I mean, shouldn't we care about the taxpayer at some point?
I think what I said is
It's not
that...
like we're not paying state taxes. I mean,
Right.
that's our money. They need to give some of that money back.
I think
So
what I said is that
it's like
the
this
state,
endless pit where we can keep going back to the
that the
taxpayer.
state should do more, that we need, this district needs more than we're providing here, and that the determination of what the state does will be based on things other than how much we're putting in. It'll be based on things that are happening at the state level.
Yeah, but the Constitution says that the state should be responsible for basic education. So why can't they contribute to the basic education? Why should we pay for all the basic education and then ask the state for additional needs? I'm not following that, because if somebody comes to me and, I'm supposed to contribute, and they say, well, we'll get to you later. I'm going to put all my money in, all the money that's required, then I'll come to you later on and ask you for some additional dollars. And I'm going to sit back and wait and see what's going to happen, as opposed to being engaged early on in the process and say, well, I'm constitutionally mandated to put some contributions to this issue.
But
This
isn't all the money that's required.
Well, it's a deficit. Then aren't you funding the deficit?
It's funding the deficit.
So you're saying that they're really asked for more money?
that they need more money to get to an
Are
adequate
they
level
asking
of
for more
education.
money? What are they asking for? Let's get back to that. So
Uh,
is it started out at 900? So I guess I should ask you in this way: is it 900? Is it 660? Is it 700? What is the need for the school district?
So,
Because you got a whole lot of different numbers
Before-
being thrown out there.
so before the change in assessed values, it was a little over $900 million.
Okay.
Because of the increase in assessed values, that meant more revenue for the district. That closed part of the gap and took it down to about $660 million.
So it's now 660.
Yes, and our proposal is to provide $770 million, which gives them a little bit of a cushion, so they're not always right on the edge.
Sorry, say that again?
So our proposal is for $770 million to give them a fund balance, which would be about $100 million, so that
So you're asking for more money than they're asking for. You
We're-
want us to provide them more money than the school district is asking us for.
Well, no, we're asking to provide them enough money so they can eliminate their deficit and have a small fund balance so that they're not always kind of right on the edge of wondering whether they're going to have to be back to making cuts.
So that's what we're.
And it's still a relatively small fund balance. It may be like 3% of their,
So that's what we want to do. We want to fund their requests. And in their request, they don't have a fund balance in their request?
I think, so there was a question you asked them about what they project their deficit to be. The deficit is 660. They didn't say, just fund our deficit. They said, here's what we would do with funding you provided. And so, we put together a package to help fund their deficit, allow them to make some small investments, keep their progress going, and to have a small fund balance.
All right, so they didn't build the fund balance into what they believe to be a solution to their deficit.
They didn't build it into what they sent over because they were answering a specific question, which is, what will your deficit be at the end of the 5 years?
But it's not, but the fund balance is not built into that number.
No, because it was a really specific question. What's your deficit?
Okay, all right. I'm going to come back because I got a bunch of questions to ask you today. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
Mr. President, I had a feeling you'd have a few questions.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I just want to focus on the proposed property tax increase. And I
Yes.
know, and this council many times has stood up and gave additional funding to public schools. Some of our constituents weren't happy with those increases, but we thought they were, valid to help the schools, and we're still trying to help the schools. But I guess I want to focus on your last couple paragraphs there, because you give, in your written testimony, you give some examples, but you obviously didn't give the example of those properties that have, the assessments have gone up much more significantly. I mean, there's certain sections of the city, where there's activity, where there's sales, where I've seen assessments, and we've heard from people going up 30, 35%, that kind of thing, And I guess that's how the average comes to 11, because there's some that go down lower than that. And I guess what I'd like to see those numbers of how much in real money some of those properties will go up, if you know what I mean. Because
Sure.
that's what we're trying to justify to people. And in those neighborhoods, there's combinations of people. There's people who have been there a long time. They can get some programs. There's people who haven't been there that long and maybe have some reasonable income, but, a tax bill that obviously could go up $1,000, $2,000 in 1 year, that's a big hit for people. And I kind of like to first see what those numbers would look like, and then secondly, what would you say to those people that are getting that kind of hit? Yeah, and a lot of them came in, by the way, they're raising young families. They would like to have their kids in public school.
Right.
So I know there's that problem there, but
So I guess the first thing I'd say is if you think the assessment is wrong, go through the first level review,
Yeah,
go through
I
the
got that.
appeal process. So if it's inaccurate, then that
Yeah.
should then wind up being lower.
well,
through
let
that
me interrupt you
process.
there. A lot of and there's that, and I think there always some validity to that. But there's also a lot in the scheme of how they assess the properties. Maybe they're not that off, but there's still a tremendous increase in 1 year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's, whether that's because they weren't paying attention before, or there was just, it's hard to believe there was, like, I've seen some assessments go up $150,000, $200,000 one year. It's hard to believe property values went up that much in one year.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And I mean, that's also one of the reasons that we're focusing on relief programs too,
Yeah, I get
making
that,
sure we
yeah.
expand the homestead and,
Yeah.
making sure people know about things like UPA and council made changes to the LOOP program. So, I mean, I think that's kind of the way that we'd have to deal with it.
No, I get you. It's just that, and I know there's not an easy answer to this, but I know when, like I say, in your examples, you say at $200,000, a home would see a decrease in its tax value, its tax bill if its assessed value went up less than 4%. Well, and I understand why you're saying this, because you're trying to sell your
No.
point here, but a lot of them went up a lot more than 4%.
Right. What I was actually trying to do there is show what the breakpoints were. Not what the breakpoints were. So to say that if you were at 200,000, anything above 4% is an increase. I wasn't trying to say that a house at 200,000 would, be more likely to have a 4% increase. It was just saying, look,
You're just giving an example.
Those are the breakpoints. So anything at 200,000, anything above 4% is an increase.
Yeah. No, I hear you. But there's a lot of people who are now way
Well,
above that break point, and I think that's a
understand.
dilemma we have in here for, I know you went from 6% to 4%, and that's good, but when you factor in those pretty considerable increase in assessments, that's a big tax bill.
The other thing you'll see in terms of what you were asking for at the beginning, in the answers to one of the questions from council, we have a grid that has a variety of percentage increases and home values, and look at what
That was
those would mean with
provided
the
to us?
homestead.
Okay, I'll
So yeah,
dig
that was
out.
provided.
Okay, all right. I know it's not answering everything.
Can I just also add, Councilman, this is Anna Adams, Budget Director. There's also an ability now, we've created a calculator, just like we did with AVI, where people can go online and they can type in their address, and they can, we've included with our proposal, what it would mean with the increased homestead and the new rate, what that
That'll
would
get us
mean
yelling
for them.
yelling at us even louder
Well,
when they see it.
But it's actually
But
quite
I know,
Lisa
Lisa gives them the
especially the impact
information.
of the homestead, it's pretty significant for many homeowners, but particularly because a $15,000 increase in the homestead has a particularly material impact on lower valued homes. So it's worth checking out for some of your constituents.
And what it has current rate with the current homestead and the new rate with the new homestead.
Okay. All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have a couple of questions on testimony. I remember hearing in prior meetings that we were going to talk about reducing departments anywhere from 1 to 2, maybe up to 3% of their costs. I was wondering if that had occurred.
So for the budget process, we ask departments, we do two ways that we kind of look at department spending a few different times of the year, but during the budget process, we ask departments to give us scenarios of cuts, and so we did that this year. We gave them targets to cut, and then we consider that as part of the budget process. We ask for what they would do with reduced funding levels, how that would impact their performance by program, whether that impacts any revenues, and then just generally services. And we used that in our decision-making when we put the budget together. So there were some departmental cuts that we took. We also do, last year we did these target budget reductions, where after the budget has been approved by City Council, in the fall, we go back to departments and basically remove some of their ability to spend. We do targeted cuts, they call them target budget cuts, and we go through and we look at each department's spending and we give them a new target level of reduction of spending levels, and that's what we did last year too.
Let me be more specific. Can you tell me what departments cut 1, 2, or 3%? Because I'm looking at from 16, fiscal year 16, which our budget was $3 billion, almost $4 billion, 3.998. And to fiscal year 19, we're going to be at 4.690, which is a 17% increase from 16 to 19, far greater than the rate of inflation.
Right. And if you look at where those increases are, the biggest increases are the Federal Reserve that we put in place, increase for pensions, the labor reserve, and then really in public safety,
Police and fire.
police and fire. When you back all that out, the increase is probably mostly accounted for by the increase in pay in our collective bargaining agreements. We also, I think, provided a response on where all the cuts were.
I have a lot of the documents here. But I'm just saying, in pension costs, it's up 18%.
That's right. And that's partly, that shows in our sales tax revenue. Some of that is the way that we are adding funding from the sales tax and putting that over and above.
But debt service is also up 20%. That seems like a big increase to me.
From to our proposed budget, from 16 actuals to our proposed.
To 19, 20% increase in debt service.
I mean, we generally want to make sure that we're conservative in our estimates on debt service, because that's one area we absolutely cannot be in a position where we cannot make.
But in
pay our
theory,
debt service.
There's also, 'cause on the debt service, right, there's a trade-off that we have to make because we have aging infrastructure and we have to invest in that infrastructure. So one of the big trade-offs every year is between what are we going to put in our capital budget to make sure that we invest in our infrastructure, and how does that relate to our debt service?
I understand
have
that,
a lot of
but as a
technology
city
in our
of
capital budget.
1,580,000 people, our population hasn't gone up. What has it gone up over the last 4 years? 5% maybe? But we're incurring more debt on top of those people, 20%. Then I went to the breakdown of every category of every department. And so I just have a question. When it says finance employee benefits, what would that be pension or not pension?
If pensions isn't broken out separately, that includes pensions and healthcare benefits are the two biggest things in there.
I mean, there's also all the other small
All the others,
benefits,
but,
but those
yeah.
are the two drivers of that.
Workers' comp would be in there.
Yeah.
So that's just to give you, that's up 15%. It says here the sinking fund debt service is up 20, which we just talked about. Public health, which we understand is an issue, is up 35%.
And some
there-
of that is
yeah,
actually a revenue. I think the health department talked about this, that this is where kind of the braiding of federal funding, so there's a match that we get back in revenue. So when you kind of net that out, it's not that significant a jump in the health department. You see that in the revenue side too.
But you also have here, the managing director's office was up 25%. By the
From
way, those-
FY16.
Yeah, those are big.
That's
I know we
partly because the
reorganized.
change in the
Reorganized, right.
reorganization, so they do different things than the
But I
managing
guess my
director's
overall
office.
point is that we are not really cutting any overhead. I always say, in the business world, the first thing you do is you look inside and figure out how do you make yourself more efficient? How do you negotiate better? How do you buy better? How do you operate more efficiently? And the last thing in the world is you raise your price.
And we.
Well, let me finish.
sorry.
In the government world, not just Philadelphia, but across the country, I feel the first thing we do is raise our price, and we don't make those efficiencies. And how about, I can give you plenty of examples, but the glaring one is the prison system, which I've been talking about. We went from 8,200 prisoners down to 5,359, and we still have budgeted for the last 3 years 23, 25 guards for the same population, and our medical costs have increased with a 35% reduction. The medical costs have increased from 46 million to 49 million, and the food costs have stayed the same, which really means the increase is close to 60%. I mean, these are huge numbers, and I think we need to go look inside more and make more reductions. I mean, there's no answer on the prison, but here's my opinion. I think that financial management is extremely important. You're dealing with $4.6 billion. What is the capital? $4 billion program roughly?
It's about 170 million is the general obligation, but there is the water and airport.
Yeah, and then you have the school district oversight. I mean, there's a lot of money at stake here, and by the way, I'm not faulting any of you. I think you guys are doing a pretty good job. My issue is that I think we need more financial people watching our money, answering to you and the mayor, not answering to the department heads. Because every department head who has a finance person, they're going to do what that department head wants them to do. We need somebody to come into the prison system and say, listen, the population dropped 35%, and they answer to you. You send them in and say, find me 15%, and they'll find it. They will find it. But in general, I mean, this is what I've seen now for 2.5 years or so, that I think we need more financial management and more investments in financial. I'm not saying cutting finance. I'm not saying cutting revenue either. I think those are areas we want to invest in. What I'm saying is in the efficiency of the government, we need to invest more to become more efficient. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. All right. Let me give him one of please. All right, Mr. DeBoe. So we talked about stability for the school district, and I'm all for stability for the school district, as we all are. And we've been showing that by virtue of a significant level of votes. So you see the bottom of this sheet here? And this is why I keep harping on this whole state issue. So you see the red line?
This is where being colorblind probably hurts, but is that the top line? Or?
The red line is the top line.
Okay.
And you see it's going down, obviously. That's
Yes.
the state, right? You see the blue line, right? Blue line is us, and we're going up.
Right.
I hate to use the little props and stuff, but I'm just trying to make a point. If we keep going up and the state keeps going down, I mean, at what point, do we say that's enough? I mean, it's one thing to talk about stability in the school district, but there are a lot of people who are a little concerned about stability in their household. I don't want to point anybody out, but I got some folks here in the room today that I know they were coming down. Rob, at some point we got to be concerned about the taxpayer. I know we're looking at a number of scenarios where there's going to be some support, possibly increasing homestead, bring down a significant number of tax bills. But guess what? Guess where we're getting that money from? The taxpayer. So it's not like we're getting this money from Jersey or Georgia. That's coming out of somebody's pocket. Just slow down on the wage tax, right? Which I'm still trying to understand that, because as long as I've been here, people have been beating me over the head telling me how important it was, sending a signal to all the different companies that may want to come here, and the onerous wage tax is the most problematic thing, and okay, voted for it, it takes money off the table. So some might say that's actually taking money out of people's pockets. I don't necessarily agree with that scenario, and I'm not trying to be partisan, but the Republicans used to always use that back in the day. When a person anticipates a reduction in their tax and you don't reduce it, then they say, well, that's money that should have been in my pocket, so you're taking money away from me. So we can't act like somehow these moves that we're doing to fund the homestead and the fund school district, which, we got to fund the schools. And myself and a number of members, very vocal. We're out there telling people to vote for the charter change on Tuesday so we can finalize our control on a local level. But we got to, at some point, right, we got to really start thinking about the people that we represent and the stability of their households and their businesses. You understand what I'm saying?
I do. And on the wage tax and business tax, we have about $140 million of wage and business tax cuts in the plan. It's actually one of the biggest investments in the plan, so we still do that. We do it at a slower rate.
If we didn't change the rate, what would it be?
It probably would have been like twice that.
All right, so I'm just saying, that's, some people will
still,
say, well,
it's still a decrease.
You're taking money out of my pocket.
Yeah, but it is still a decrease.
Look, Rob, I'm just basing I didn't used to always think that the wage tax made any difference. I used to sit in here and argue when I wasn't necessarily, I was over there in one of those chairs. Actually, I sat over there.
Right there, I think.
Yeah, remember that?
I do.
Right.
Oh,
so,
there.
yeah, I was over there. We had actually the Republican row. I was between Brian O'Neill, Fran Rizzo, and Jack Kelly. So a little conservative thing going on on the back row over there. But, eventually I got beat into the submission, and all right, maybe we should do this. And I, bought into it. And again, I understand the need, I'm just concerned that people are acting like somehow these other moves we're making to bring the numbers down on a lot of people, somehow happening outside of the sticking your hands in the taxpayer's pocket.
Right. And we completely understand this is a really hard choice. We think investing in the schools is worth it, but we understand. We understand this is really hard. We're not trying to imply at all that we think this is easy or that there's not pain with it.
I'm sure you're not. And my issue, so it's clear that I'm not talking about not investing in schools, but I'm talking about not going after individuals. And again, it's my understanding that there is some thought and probably some movement on funding, putting more funding in schools in the state. And I don't think they can draw a line around the city of Philadelphia and take us out of the equation. If they're going to raise it for the state, we'll probably get some of that money.
Right.
So my whole issue, and going back to this again, I don't understand the process that you fund everything and then you go ask people, and I know we had this disagreement on adequacy and, you know,
Right.
what else you need to invest in, and I'm all good with that too. Why you wouldn't ask them to be a part of the front money, the early money going in. So that's that. All right, so OPA, Councilman touched on this. So there's been like some really weird assessments in the city of Philadelphia in this year. Every year people talk about OPA and their assessments, but this year it's been some really, I hate to use this word, but I'm gonna use it, wackadoo. That's what I call it when you can't think of anything else to call it, just wackadoo. I mean, literally properties on the same block, swings of $150,000, $200,000, same property, block over, larger properties that get assessed lower than the properties on this block. I mean, it's out of control. And I know we have some great people working at OPA and they're trying to do a good job, but this year, there's really been some very, very strange assessments. And it's caused us to go out, and we told you, we talked about this, City Council has put a request for proposals out. Next Thursday, Mr. Stitt, next Thursday we'll be getting a response and hopefully be in a position to hire an entity to do an audit of not this year, because this year is in, you know, we can't impact that, but an audit not only on the more likely the process as it relates to OPA, because clearly some things are not happening correctly to get to that kind of a swing. So hopefully at the end of that audit process, we'll have a better sense and we'll feel, I guess, a little more comfortable that whatever was done or whatever will be done based on this third-party analysis will put us in a much better position to make decisions as we move ahead. So that's very important. We would like to have that available for the next year. So that, again, causes some concern because if we're working off of numbers that are not necessarily, or a process that's not accurate, we may be moving ahead on some things that probably may not be consistent with the process that should have taken place. So just want to put that on the record.
Right. And we say we're fully supportive of the audit, and we talked about this a little with Councilman Greenlee. You know, there is an appeal process that can help people if they're if they think their values are off. Right. Both the first level review and then the formal appeal with BRT.
Right. Yeah, because clearly something's not right. And I actually like this gentleman, but the OPA director was here. He said this whole back and forth between him about last year's assessments were accurate and this year's assessments, as he said, more accurate. So I took that to mean that, well, you know, if you're more accurate, if you're accurate now, then you weren't accurate last year. But he said, no, we're more accurate. So I don't know what that's all about. But that bottom line is an 11% swing on average, right? Because there are properties that, like, you know, one of those signs, if I can read that, 70% tax hike. And I did not ask these people to be here, so I don't want people to think, oh, he set up a prop for Mr. Defoe. They just happen to be here. So we're obviously concerned about a lot of different things, state, the OPA process on assessments, just a number of things that we're really, really concerned about. So I just wanted to put that on the record for you today, sir. And as usual, we'll, you know, City Council, probably one of the most responsible legislative bodies in the country, because we always figure out a way to make things work, balanced budget as required by the charter, funding necessary programs. You know, we've stepped to the plate. I give our members significant kudos. Okay, I'll come back. I'm at my 10-minute mark. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kemp.
Thank you very much, Council President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So let's see, I had a couple of questions. One is, could you let me know, usually the city gives a certain amount of grant money to the school district every year. Not looking ahead to 2019, but what was the amount of money that actually was given over to the school district?
About 105 million.
105 million, okay. And what is the projected amount of money that if the revenue streams were to go forward, what is the proposal to kick over to the school district? Because it goes up
So it goes up
fairly-
to about 170 in the first year, and then it keeps growing.
Okay. And I'm wondering, Mr. DeBow, if you can help me out a little bit.
Yeah.
So one of the questions is that we have this, obviously, millage shift between the city and the school district. So 55-45 percentage ratio, 0.77 to 0.6,
I'm
whatever.
sorry, but we were just conferring on the number.
Yeah, so we have a, roughly 55-45 split currently
Yes.
between the school district and the city of Philadelphia, which, works out to, 0.77 and 0.67, something like that with the
Right.
city. So if you are shifting over 105 million anyway, and that comes just straight out of city money, is that right?
right.
It's a general
That's right.
Comes out
fund
of the
for
general
the
fund.
city?
Yes.
And if the
And
proposal...
part of our proposal is, apart from any of the other changes, to add 20 million to that. So that would be, without any other tax change, 125 million next year.
So just taking the 105 million shift,
That's not a shift.
no, not a shift, the 105 million in grant money.
Yes.
I think we mentioned that every 1% shift is roughly $20 million.
No, what I said is that we gave you an answer that said what every $20 million worth, $20 million is worth in millage. But
Yes.
yeah.
So what is roughly every 20 million in millage is worth how much?
It'll take me a second to find it, I think.
I need a calculator. Borrow your phone for a calculator. A calculator? No, just whenever he gives it to me.
Okay, so it's 0.0197.
For every 20 million?
Yeah.
Okay. And let me just see, 0.4 times 620. So 8.4, 7.7. Okay, so 7 times 140. All right. So I guess one of the questions is that if you're looking at $170 million potential moving over into the school district, couldn't that money also be moved by effectively keeping the amount of the millage the same and shifting the millage? And so that money effectively moves over to the school district anyway, without directly impacting the amount of taxes that would go. We are giving over what would close...
None of that 65 million comes from the property tax. That's all independent of the property tax.
Correct.
So
So it's on top of the property tax?
Correct.
Right. So we're doing it anyway. And what I guess I'm wondering is that if you effectively take what would have been a grant and reduce the amount of taxes that would come through the city end and gave it over to the school district, you would effectively be doing the same thing. You would just be changing up the shift in the millage, right?
you'd be
You would-
cutting the city budget, essentially, is what you're saying.
But you're giving this money of 170 million
Not
anyway.
give the
we're-
170 to the district.
And give the 170 to the district by raising the district's rates.
So the 170 would have to then be taken from somewhere.
You'd have to reduce, if you didn't change the overall rate,
But
you'd have
isn't the
to...
170 million a grant anyway? You're giving it to the...
Yeah, the money is coming from slowing down the wage tax, increasing the transfer tax, and then just an increase in our grant. If instead of doing it that way, we just reduced the city property tax, that would be a hit to our budget of, I guess, $45 million.
and increased it through the budget, you're saying that that revenue cannot be reachieved in any other way?
Well, we're proposing to actually achieve it through slowing down the wage tax reduction and increasing the transfer tax, rather than reducing the property tax.
Okay. I wanted to just check in because I guess I'm thinking about a total amount of money that the city brings in.
Yeah. Got it.
So one of my other questions was about the tax abatement. So I think the city was supposed to release a study on the tax abatement at the
Right.
end of April.
Yeah, it'll
What
probably
is-
come out this week. We're
Okay.
putting some final touches on it.
Could you give us any insight or preview into that?
So I think the broad conclusion will be that there's still economic value in the abatement, and that eliminating it would lead to a reduction in jobs and development, although not as much of a reduction as we would have seen 5 years ago, because we're in a different place in the economic cycle. And that if we did want to adjust it, there's no perfect way to adjust it, but the report, when it comes out, will show kind of the details of various options and what they would mean in terms of development, jobs, revenue for the district and the city.
I mean, my hope would be is that the study would give us a very detailed look at how the abatement is utilized across the city, the kind of property values that it impacts, how much revenue it brings in, and it will do all of that, won't it? As opposed to coming up with like some kind of broad conclusion that I think most people
It will show that, and then
debating.
it will show that, and it will show kind of various scenarios for modifications.
It'll
and
give
what
us
they would
zip
mean.
codes and value of the homes and everything that are.
Broadly, probably not the kind of level of detail you're talking about, but it will show kind of where it's used in general.
And can we request that level of detail from those who did the study? They'll be able to go into more depth, or?
We can probably, we can get that from our records.
Okay. And I think one of the questions has been that there've been preliminary indications about the limited use of the abatement where it's being applied mostly, and I think that's one of the questions that I hope that the study will take a look at
it
about
shows, yes.
where it's being distributed.
I think there's a map in the report that you'll be able to see that.
Great, thank you very much. I think those are all my questions for now.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. I have a few more questions I wanted to ask.
Sure.
On your testimony today, the way I understand it, the freezing of the wage tax reductions or lessening of the wage tax reductions produces $340 million over 5 years?
Correct.
And then what is the 4.1%, how much does that produce?
It's about $192 million.
And the transfer tax, what does that produce?
138, and that's
36.
136, and that's directly to offset the homestead.
106?
136.
136. Okay. So that doesn't add up to, though, the 7.
There's also $20 million a year from the city's general fund, and that's $100 million over 5 years.
That's the 100, that's the piece,
Yeah.
okay. Is that new to this? Because I don't remember hearing that before.
That's always been there. I was there from the very beginning.
Okay. Okay. I want to ask you a question on, if we could do I have two last questions. One is, I'd like to have a study done if we can, and I know this will be controversial, but I'll say it anyway. Instead of having the 1% proposed construction tax that we're talking about, which, by the way, may have sent the wrong messaging to Amazon, because that sent a message that to come into this market, it's $40 million based on the construction they want to do here. I'm not sure that's the right messaging. But instead of having the 1%, can we do a study on the tax abatement, which I think you're working on now? And because my thinking here is keeping the 10-year abatement the way it is, but changing it as follows. And the key to any change we make is to make sure it doesn't affect the building, the creation of new jobs, and the economy, but to change it slightly over a term of time. So we changed the abatement to make it 8.5 years, basically as follows. 7 years, 100%. Year 8, 75%. Year 9, 50. Year 10, 25%. And that essentially makes the abatement 8.5 years.
Yeah, that's included in the report.
Okay. And what I'd like to know is if that is included in the report, basically the construction tax of 1% makes the abatement 9.3. And the construction tax, the benefit of the construction tax, which I understand, produces $22 million to the Housing Trust Fund. What I'd like the administration to look at is if that makes the abatement 9.3 and this makes the abatement 8.5, can we fund the Housing Trust Fund for that $22 million over the next 10 years? Because we'll have the abatement dollars at the end to pay for it.
I understand the question. We haven't looked at it, but we can look at that.
Because that would, and then, and by the way, in 3 to 5 years, we should look at, if the market's going well and it hasn't affected it, we should look at the abatement again and maybe bring it to 7 years and then bring it to 5 years. But gradually, every economist I've talked to, everyone has said to me, slow, gradual, so it doesn't affect the market. We're actually starting to see now construction slow down.
Right. I think one difference between the construction impact tax and the proposal you're talking about is you wouldn't start to see the new revenue from your proposal until 8 years out.
Right. So the administration would have to finance that in the short term. That's why I'm making that ask. Okay. That's why I asked that question. I still want those programs to happen. I still want the money coming in. I'm trying to figure out a different way to do it.
So, yeah, so then part of the question is how do you...
So I don't want to affect any of the ideas of the $22 million. I want to keep that in place, but can we finance it? Because right now, it's essentially a 9.3-year abatement. This would make it an 8.5. Can we finance it that way?
Right. Just the cash flows are different, so that's what we'd have to figure out.
Let me ask you a question because there's been a lot of news about it. I want to talk about the reconciliations for a minute. Do you have an idea when these two accounts, when we stopped reconciling them, what month?
So I think we started to fall behind in about 2014, 2015, when we lost a couple of senior people.
If that's the case, why was it told to us in testimony by the Treasurer's Office that it hadn't been reconciled for 7 years?
So I think that is a different account. I think that's a payroll account that will actually be up to date on by the end of the next month.
So are there two accounts that we're dealing with, payroll and general disbursement?
Yeah, we have multiple accounts, and those are the two that we're talking about.
Is every other account except those two reconciled as of today?
I think there are two others that are behind that also will be up to date within the next couple of months.
So how many total accounts are not reconciled at this point?
I think it's a handful.
More than two, then?
Yeah.
It's 4 or 5?
I think so, yeah.
And the other accounts are more than, so some accounts are from 2010 and some accounts are from 2014?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Okay. And does that fall under the Treasury Department to do that reconciliation?
It does, yes.
And just so I understand how this works, the Treasury Department have people working there who are supposed to reconcile on a monthly basis, I assume?
So the way the process is supposed to work and is working now is you have people who do reconciliations daily that build into a weekly reconciliation that then build into monthly reconciliations.
Okay. And so we have two accounts that weren't reconciled from 2010, and then there's a couple from 2014. And then on that CAFR report last year was released that there was $33.3 million on our records, but on the bank, but I understand we found $6 million of that sort.
So that's the Cash account. That's the one that fell behind in 2014, 2015. When we did reconciliations, we saw that there was a $40 million gap. By the time of the CAFR, it was down to $33 million. Now it's at about $27 million.
And have we awarded, I understand we're awarded a contract or an RFP went out?
We are.
For an accounting firm?
Yes, they started this week, and they're in the process of putting their work plan together.
Do you have an idea when that'll be resolved by?
They're putting their work plan together this week, so we'll have a better sense of that when they finish that work plan.
So are we talking about a month or 6 weeks, or are we talking longer than that?
I think longer than that. I won't know until I see their work plan.
More than 2 months?
I don't want to speculate.
I mean, I would tell them that if we're missing this money, they need to get on it now.
Yep, agreed.
I mean, citizens of the city expect us to manage these finances efficiently, and my position will be before I vote for any new tax, I'm going to want to see that all these accounts are reconciled and brought up to date. So this is going to be my personal position. I'm not speaking for my colleagues, but that will be my position. Going forward, how do we prevent this from ever happening?
So a couple of things. One, we've now got staffing in place in the treasurer's office. We're putting internal controls in place to make sure it happens, and the outside firm is going to help us with those new internal controls to make sure that they work.
And will they be monitored by the finance director, you?
They will, and we now get weekly reports from the treasurer's office on what's happening with the reconciliations.
You know, I said this earlier, I still believe that we need more financial management and people in the various departments of the city, answering to you and the mayor. Because I think this is a huge $4.6 billion city of Philadelphia budget that could use more eyes on it. And this is the best example that these accounts went unreconciled for so long. Any other business would be out of business with this thing going on. It just wouldn't operate. And I'm just not clear how that's going to get reconciled if some of those accounts are 7 years old. That's a big job to do. It's not easy to do.
Yeah, that's why we brought in outside help to make sure we got it done.
Have we looked into to confirm, or we don't know at this point, if there's been any kind of cybersecurity attacks on our accounts?
We haven't seen any of that.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm glad to hear we're putting in the controls so it doesn't happen again. I think the two things we need to do now is not really focus on what happened. The thing to focus on now is to get it reconciled ASAP and to put in the controls so it never happens again.
Agreed.
And if we can do that, I'm good. Anyway, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. DeBow, Harrisburg. So you said that, actually saw some of the lobbyists, the administration's lobbyists up in Harrisburg. I didn't know what they were doing, but I'm assuming they were up there talking about school. So exactly what is the ask for the state? Is it just generally more money, or is it, what are they asking them to do? To do charter school reimbursement, funding formula? I mean, what?
Yeah, I think this year
supposed?
it's the governor's request, and I think there'll be a different request next year. Governor's request is, I think, $14 million in basic education.
Well, I'm not talking about this year. They're not going to do anything this year. I think we all know that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Are we going to wait until next year to ask them?
I think it's like, next year there would be a different ask, and I think, as we've talked about, after the election, they may be in a different place.
Right. Well, what are we asking them to do?
I think that's something that we will talk about with them as we get there. But I think the charter reimbursement line is probably a big part of that.
Is there something that you don't want to say in a public venue?
No, well, yes. Yes.
I'm just saying, you said it. I mean, there seems to be this reluctance to have a strategy for money from Harrisburg. I don't understand that.
I think we all agree that we should get
what are
additional
we
funding
asking
from
them to
Harrisburg,
do?
and I think the charter reimbursement is a big part of that. But it's also a year off, so I don't want to say something now, then when we actually have the conversation in a year is going to be different. I think it will evolve over that year.
So we're going to wait until next year?
I don't think, as you said, they're not going to do anything in this year's budget. So yes, there will be a discussion after this year's budget's over.
With the state?
Yes.
You think that's prudent?
I don't think they're going to do anything in this year's budget, so I don't know kind of...
You don't want to lay the groundwork for... I mean,
as I said...
I go up there. And I was up there 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Met with a lot of people. And they actually said, well, if we do something next year, what will you guys be looking for? So are you all having those conversations?
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right. I won't belabor that point. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gim.
Thank you very much, Council President. So just for clarity, the administration isn't putting on the table that we want the charter reimbursement for FY19?
In this year's budget, right.
So it would be for FY19. We want to see the charter
We
reimbursement
would
from
want
the
to
state for
see
FY19.
charter reimbursement fixed as quickly as possible. I just don't think that'll be in their 19 budget.
Right, but it's still the position of the administration. You
Yes.
are asking for it, part of it is like, we don't want to, we're not in the state legislature, so it's not possible for us about whether we can definitively control it, but we should be
Right.
making as much noise as possible each and every single year that we cannot continue to expand charters recklessly and at the expense of public schools if we're not demanding that the state restore, not put in, but restore the line item that was supposed to fund for charter school offsets for the enormous amount of expenses we pay out for transportation, for school nursing, and for other special education, for assessment services, the charter school office, et cetera, that really need to be part of the messaging that goes to Harrisburg. Like now, not next year, but now.
Right, but I think that's right, although I think we can't rely on it when we look at how the school district will be funded.
Just for a point of clarity, regarding the tax abatement, and I do appreciate my colleague bringing it up and raising a proposal that has been put forward before, which is to graduate in the tax abatement. I think that many of us have talked about the tax abatement as being both a tool that should be used to incentivize development in the places that need it, and that it should be recognized as a property bill. I mean, it is a school funding bill. It's also a city bill. The money that comes in will go 55-45, 55% to the school district as well. I don't think it's an enormous sum of money, but it is a chunk of money, and as we're debating different revenue options, it's money that could have an impact, right? And so my hope is that the report that comes out at the end of April, just as a point of clarification, will include some clarity, particularly around how it might impact schools, or will it just be an amount of, like a lump sum?
No, it will actually show revenues by year. There are tables at the back that show revenue by year and how they compare for various scenarios.
Okay, and so, that's one of the things that I think is an important aspect as we look at these things. I think I've spoken before, that the current way that the tax abatement's used it's a pretty blunt instrument. It's kind of not changed that much or evolved that much over the last 2 decades, and it's important for us as the city evolves and as our needs evolve, that the tools that we use at our disposal also evolve to reflect the changing nature of the city and what's actually needed and what especially our institutions deserve.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. A couple other questions I wanted just to ask. How much does the reassessment, the average of 11 to 12%, what are the dollars that generates?
So the district reports, for the district side, it's about 197 million over the 5 years, and for the city, it's in the 140s.
140?
Yeah.
Over 5 years.
So the total is 337?
And the average it's 11. The median was like 7.5 for single-family homes.
So when the mayor gave his budget address, the numbers were lower that he requested. Did the numbers go up?
So when the mayor gave his budget address in early March, we didn't have the new assessed values yet. And so we projected lower growth than the assessments actually showed. So since there were higher values in the assessments, which produced more revenue, we reduced the proposed amount of the property tax increase.
But even
from
with the
6
numbers
to
that you...
4.1.
And increase the homes.
And increase the homestead.
Right.
Yeah.
But the numbers that you're giving me is the wage tax produces 340.
Yes,
The 4.1 is 192.
correct.
The transfer is 136. And on top of that, the assessment is 337.
That's the city and the school district combined.
But that was the total
So-
request when the mayor came was
Here,
like
let me walk you through
960.
it. So where we are now is 192.7 from the increase in the property tax, 339.8 from the wage tax reductions, 100 million from the contribution to the increase in our contribution, 136 million from the transfer tax, and $198 million from the growth in property tax from the assessment. That all adds up to 966.
I thought you said the total growth was 337 of the assessment.
You were adding in the city side.
Yeah, both.
Yeah, but what the proposal was talking about is funding the school district. The 140 for the city was never part of this funding package, and the 140 really winds up funding the increase in the homestead.
What is that total? The numbers you just gave me?
966.
It's just, okay. The other question was just simple, is what are the school district's needs per year going forward, like 19, 20, and so forth? What is the per year needs?
What's the funding we're providing by year?
Yeah.
I don't have that one.
I have that on one of these sheets here. Let me get that to you. I have it.
Okay,
I can
all right.
get
You
you
just like to
quickly.
understand.
Yeah, I just can't find it right now.
I mean, you've gone over this budget several times, I assume.
Yes.
Are there any other alternative ways of funding this versus raising the real estate taxes and stopping the reduction of the wage tax and increases in transfer taxes? Are there alternatives?
We
you
spent a
could
lot
present?
of time looking and thought this was the best package.
And have you looked at the prison budget at all?
Yeah. And one of the things, if you looked at what was happening to the prison budget, like from FY15 to FY17, you saw it go from 245 to 260. It was kind of going up and up. And what we've done is kind of arrested that increase and started it to decrease. I think in the PowerPoint, it shows that by FY20, it goes down to about 240 million. So instead of increasing by 20 million over 2 years, we have it now at a place where it's decreasing by 20 million over a couple
But
of years.
that's not including your fringe benefit costs.
No, so with the fringe benefit costs, you'd probably actually see a bigger decrease because those will go down too as the other costs go down.
So the numbers that I had, it was the prison budget, actually I just received them recently, was closer to be exact, in fiscal year 17, 391 million, and in fiscal year 19 budgeted 385 million, which includes all the
So you're
fringe.
including the fringes.
Do
The
a
number,
calculation for the fringe?
yeah, the number I was talking about did not have the fringe in it.
Right, so I'm including the whole cost. And all I'm saying is that if the population reduced 35%, I think we can save 15%. That's a big number on 385.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge, and I know we've had this conversation a few times, part of it is that I think back in 15 and 16 and 17, there were things going on in the prison system that we wouldn't want to continue doing. There were triple selling going on, there were restricted movements, there were activities happening at the prisons that now that the census is down, we can actually have 21st century correctional facilities and activities and make sure that we are investing in services for our inmates that can help reduce or prevent people from having to go back into the prison. So we're focusing on those things, which unfortunately means I think the apples to apples comparisons aren't very useful, because I think what we should have probably seen at that point when the census was so high, if we were operating the prison system as we should have, those costs would have been way higher than we actually showed. And now that, there's so much of this is kind of, and so those apples to apples comparisons unfortunately aren't very useful, because it doesn't show where it should have been, what we should have been spending in prisons to prevent us from doing triple selling, from preventing us from doing restricted movement at the time.
You know, I feel like I could become a prison consultant at this point, okay?
We have one of those coming in to help us, so, at your suggestion.
Right. But let me just say this. There's certain things that don't make sense. It doesn't make sense that the guards are the same with a 35% reduction. It doesn't make sense that the medical costs went from 46 million to 49 million with a 35% reduction. And when you just do the simple math, 2-3 years ago, we spent $5,600 per prisoner for medical. Now we're spending $9,500, which is a 65% increase. But this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not a medical expert, but I know that when we've spoken to
I've heard all the stories about Hep C and all the other things. I've heard all the stories, I've heard them all. I'm just saying 65% doesn't cut the mustard here.
Can you take a step back to the question you asked before about the school district's need by year? I think you got this sheet from the district. It shows their deficit by year and then
Okay.
what their numbers look like after the funding package.
Okay.
We can send it back if you don't have it, but I think you received this.
And I guess my point is, from the finance director and the department, maybe there's a way for you to get involved in this budget with the prison department. By the way, I think Commissioner Carney's doing a good job. I just think she needs
think she is,
support in the
yes.
financial area. That's all I'm asking for, to support her in that financial area. Anyway, thank you for your testimony today. Thank you, Council President.
Good, Councilman. All right, I had a couple more questions, but they can wait on some stuff offline I would like to ask you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony. Talk to you a little later. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Need to got one more call back, but you guys can leave. Yeah. One call back. The Office of Violence Prevention. So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Council President.
Good. First of all, thank you for getting the document to us before we concluded our budget process. And, thank you for your continued good work. But there are a couple of questions I needed to ask you. Let's see. I'm trying to think if I should start on the tail end. So let me start on the tail end and I know, so we don't have to get into the testimony. Page 3, in your Office of Violence Prevention Program Review, and there was some different numbers initially when the first story came out, when certain council person was raising saying about, what we're doing with gun violence. Then the initial story came out and said we spent, it was a very high number on violence prevention. I think it was like $60 million, something like that, yeah. And everybody, most people that knew government knew that probably was not a reasonable number. I think it's now being revised down to like 13 million? And so this section here, the OVP Program Review Interim Report, is that the $13 million?
It is.
It is? Okay, so you're reviewing how that 13 million is being spent, if it's being spent appropriately, if it's measurables, i.e. actually reducing gun violence, or are we just paying a bunch of people to be on salary or giving them contracts that are not producing?
Yes, sir.
In terms of our ability to have a sense of that, do we have a timeline on that?
Yes. We're looking to have...
I'm sorry, just say your name for the record.
I'm sorry. Sean Del Ravel, Executive Director for Office of Violence Prevention. We're looking to have a report to you by... June 1?
June 1?
Yes.
And we'll have a report on that 13 million, how we're spending it, where we're spending it, and maybe have a sense of whether or not it's productive in terms of measurables. All right.
And for clarity, Councilman, Brian Abernathy, Deputy Managing Director. For clarity, I think we will have a sense of what we're spending, how we're spending it, and some broad characteristics of those programs. I think we need to continue to work with our providers to make sure that we have appropriate metrics in place, and I think that's going to take a little bit of time. But I think we will have a baseline in that final report.
All right. So that's why the follow-up was, if we find out that, say, 3/4 of the 13 million isn't being spent in a way that's getting real results as reduced, what would be the strategy? And is it too early to say what it would be? Would there be some sort of a mid-year transfer? Would it be a reconsideration of contracts? I mean, because my concern is that as you get close to the beginning of the new fiscal year, if you lock yourselves into contracts or budgets, what could you conceivably do in the interim process between the next fiscal year?
I think we're still determining that. And it's hard to say because everything's on an individual basis. But overall, we're still trying to determine how moving forward, contractually, we'll have to put things in place to actually make it work.
I think ideally, we want to get to performance-based contracting, right? We want to be able to say, you should help us hit these specific goals, and if you don't hit those goals, then there's repercussions. We're a long way away from that. It took DHS 4 or 5 years to get there, and I think it's going to take us some time to get there as well. But I think the goal is to make sure that we're funding our programs at an appropriate level and that we're actually getting a return on investment. And when we're not getting a return on investment is to redirect those dollars. But I think we also recognize that these programs haven't had the technical support or the back office support that some of them need. And so I think that's going to be part of this conversation as well. Are there ways that we as a city can support especially some of these smaller programs to be more successful going forward?
Okay, all right, so we'll look for that, and we'll look for your aftermath, assuming that you get fined. What we probably will find is some of this money could be spent a little more prudently, a little more results. Then the other issue was the one that we've been discussing, the community trust building. And in this recommendation, we agree we're going to take out micro grants, but after I see how much money you're talking about it in there now, I know why it says micro grants. So this $50,000 that you're proposing, I mean, in all honesty, I wouldn't bother to make a phone call personally to those groups of individuals that we met leading up to this, because I'd catch all kind of you-know-what. So it's unlikely, and I say this, and I'm only one vote, that we'll be looking to get additional funding for the next, this is for fiscal 19, right?
Yes, sir.
It is.
So $50,000 for a whole year is like, you're going to fund, what, 3 groups? I mean, realistically, we want to give a person $1,000. I mean, in the meeting we had like, what was it, like 20 people in there? 20 different
25.
organizations? Yeah. So why are we only proposing $50,000?
I think the feedback we heard from some of those organizations, and certainly Mr. Ravel, correct me if I misspeak, is that they weren't looking for large programmatic grants, but they were actually looking for small investments, whether that be support of a specific event, whether it be food at a specific event. And that was what that $50,000 was geared towards. If we want to blow that out to increase programmatic funding, I think you're absolutely right. And then $50,000 doesn't get us anywhere. But if it's to support daily activity that's already on the ground, support grassroots activity, I think that $50,000 could be very helpful. But I think it depends on exactly what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I just think, I mean,
Understood.
I hate to think what they're going to say if they see the $50,000 proposal. So we probably shouldn't even put this out yet. And I say that in the context of, I guess, our proposal, the city's proposal, in providing, what are we looking at, $20 million a year more for police?
It's actually, I believe it's, I'm looking at the budget director, I believe the police budget ask is more than 20 million. The police budget ask increase? That's what I thought. It's about 100 million.
100 million over 5 years, right?
What's 100 million?
So that's 20 million a year. So we're looking at doing 20 million a year for the police. 6 years. All right. Okay, under 20 million. All right. And we're looking at $50,000 for the on the streets presence. So that's kind of a significant disparity, and I'm not suggesting that a person working the streets, talking to people, doing what they do, and they do it well in some cases, is equivalent to a police officer, but in some instances actually may be better than a police officer because that relationship is long-term. So I'm going to ask you guys, where's my best friend, Mr. DeBoe, to go back and look at that, because this is really, I hate to use the term insulting, but some people are going to take it that way. So can we please go back and look at this $50,000 for this on-ground presence, particularly given the fact that we had at least 25 organizations in that one meeting? Can we do that, please, before we conclude the budget process?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, again, well, thank you, and then we'll continue to review, and then we'll get back to you all. So thank you so much for coming in.
And thank you for being flexible on timing as well, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, I probably don't need a script for this, so we're going to stand in recess until 5 p.m., at which time we will be getting public testimony. Thank you very much.